Hello everyone, I am Mano Scaling, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Now get comfortable and relax. My name is Daniel Lopez, and I am 28 years old. This happened in Yellow River State Forest in the remote backcountry of Allamakee County, Iowa, during the third week of October 2024. The five of us had been planning this backpacking trip for months. Marcus Chen, my college roommate and the one who'd suggested Yellow River in the first place, had been obsessing over Iowa's only true wilderness for weeks. 8,000 acres of untouched forest, he'd kept saying, showing us photos of the rugged bluffs and deep ravines. Nothing like the rest of Iowa. It's like stepping into another world. Sarah Williams, Marcus's girlfriend, had been skeptical from the start. She was more of a luxury camping type, hot showers and electrical hookups, but Marcus had worn her down with promises of spectacular fall colors and genuine adventure. Jake Martinez, our IT buddy from work, was just excited to disconnect from civilization for a few days. And then there was Tommy Adams, the newest addition to our friend group, a transfer from the Chicago office who'd been eager to explore his new home state. The plan was simple: 3 days and 2 nights on the backpack trails, camping at the remote sites deep in the Paint Creek unit. We'd enter through the main trailhead near the forest headquarters on County Highway B25, hike to Heffern's Hill Camp the first night, then push deeper into the backcountry for our second camp. Marcus had gotten permits for the primitive sites, the ones you could only reach on foot, miles from any road. Perfect timing for it too, Jake had said while we packed our gear in my driveway. Peak fall colors and the weather's supposed to be clear. Highs in the 60s, lows in the 40s. Ideal hiking weather. But as we drove through the rolling farmland of northeast Iowa that Friday afternoon, the sky began to darken with unexpected clouds. The GPS kept glitching as we got closer to the forest, recalculating our route every few minutes despite the fact that Highway B25 was a straight shot. "Weird," Tommy muttered from the passenger seat. "Says we're going to arrive in 12 minutes, then 15, now 8. This thing's having a stroke." Marcus, squeezed into the middle of the back seat between the girls, was studying his paper map. "Good thing I brought backup navigation. Technology always gets funky out here. Something about the limestone bedrock interfering with signals." The first real sign that something was wrong came when we reached the forest headquarters. The building was dark, windows reflecting the gray sky like dead eyes. A handwritten sign taped to the glass door read, "Closed until further notice. Staff shortage." "That's strange," Sarah said, checking her phone. "Their website said they'd be open until 6 on weekdays." Jake tried the door handle. Locked. "Well, good thing we already have our permits." He pulled out the email confirmation on his phone, but the screen showed only a blank white page. "What the hell? I know I saved this." "Don't worry about it," Marcus said, shouldering his pack. "Backcountry camping doesn't really require permits anyway. It's more of a courtesy thing. Besides, look around. We're the only people here." He was right. The parking area was completely empty except for our car. No other vehicles, no signs of recent activity. Even the trash cans looked like they hadn't been emptied in weeks. We gathered our packs and headed for the trailhead. The weight felt good on my shoulders. 40 pounds of gear, food, and water for 3 days. I'd been hiking regularly to prepare for this trip, and my legs felt strong as we started down the Paint Creek Trail. For the first hour, everything seemed normal. The trail was well maintained, following the north bank of Big Paint Creek through a corridor of mature oak and maple trees. The fall colors were spectacular, brilliant reds and golds that seemed almost artificial in their intensity. The only sounds were our boots on the packed earth and the gentle murmur of the creek. Sarah was in better spirits now, pointing out interesting rock formations and taking photos with her camera. "This is actually really beautiful," she admitted. "I can see why you wanted to come here, Marcus." But as we hiked deeper into the forest, the trail began to narrow. The trees pressed closer, their branches forming a canopy so thick that it filtered the already dim light into a greenish twilight. The creek sound faded as the trail climbed away from the water, winding up onto the bluff system that gave this part of Iowa its unique character. "Jesus, it's getting dark fast," Jake said, checking his watch. "It's only 4:30. Tommy looked around nervously. "Where is everyone? I mean, it's Friday afternoon in peak fall season. Shouldn't there be other hikers?" Marcus consulted his map. "We're about 2 miles in. Heffern's Hill Camp should be another 1.5 miles. Most day hikers probably stick to the shorter loops near the parking area." But I was starting to notice other things that bothered me. The trail markers were old and faded, some hanging askew or missing entirely. Several times we had to stop while Marcus studied the map, unsure which fork to take. And there was something about the silence that felt wrong. No bird calls, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush, just our footsteps and breathing, and the occasional creak of tree branches overhead. "Does anyone else smell that?" Sarah asked suddenly. We all stopped and sniffed the air. There was definitely something. A sour, organic odor that reminded me of meat left too long in the sun. "Probably just a dead deer," Jake said. "Happens all the time in the woods." But the smell seemed to follow us as we continued hiking, growing stronger rather than weaker. By the time we reached what Marcus insisted was Heffern's Hill Camp, my stomach was churning from the stench. The campsite was a small clearing on a wooded hilltop, marked by a wooden post with a faded number 7 nailed to it. 5 primitive sites were scattered among the trees, each just a flat spot with a fire ring made of stacked stones. Marcus had been right about one thing. It felt genuinely remote. The only signs of civilization were the fire rings themselves and a narrow dirt path that led off into the woods toward what the map showed as an equestrian camping area. "Home sweet home," Marcus said, dropping his pack near the fire ring at Site 3. "Let's get camp set up before it gets completely dark." We worked efficiently, having done this many times before. Tommy and I gathered firewood while the others set up tents and organized the cooking area. The routine was comforting, a return to familiar rhythms despite the strangeness of the day. But as we worked, I kept noticing things that didn't feel right. The fire ring stones were oddly arranged, almost deliberate in their pattern. Some of the wood we collected was carved with what looked like symbols, probably just natural weathering, but unsettling nonetheless. And that smell was getting stronger. "I think there might be a dead animal around here somewhere," I said to Tommy as we gathered another armload of fallen branches. "Should we look for it? Might attract bears or something." Tommy shrugged. "Marcus would know better than us. This is his expedition." When we returned to camp with the wood, Marcus was studying his map with a frown. "Something's not right," he said. "According to this, we should be able to see the fire tower from here. It's supposed to be on a hill just east of this camp." We all looked around. Dense trees in every direction, no tower visible. "Maybe the map's wrong," Sarah suggested. "Didn't you say this place was established in the 1930s? Things change." "The tower was built in 1963, Marcus said, and I read online that it's still standing, even though it's closed to the public. We should definitely be able to see it." Jake was trying to get a fire started, but the wood seemed reluctant to catch. Even with lighter fluid, the flames kept sputtering and dying. "This is weird," he muttered. "The wood feels dry, but it won't burn properly." By the time full darkness fell, we finally had a small fire going, though it burned with an odd blue tint that none of us could explain. We cooked our freeze-dried dinners in relative silence, each lost in our own thoughts. The smell that had been bothering us all afternoon was now so strong it was difficult to eat. "Okay, I can't ignore this anymore," Sarah said, setting down her barely touched meal. "Something is seriously dead around here. Like, really recently dead." Marcus nodded grimly. "I've been trying to place the smell. It's not just decomposition. There's something else mixed in. Something chemical, maybe?" That's when we heard the first scream. It came from somewhere deep in the forest. probably a half-mile away but clearly audible in the still night air. A human voice, definitely, but distorted in a way that made my skin crawl. It rose in pitch to an inhuman shriek, held for several seconds, then cut off abruptly. We all froze, staring at each other across the fire. "What the fuck was that?" Tommy whispered. "Coyote," Jake said, but his voice lacked conviction. "They can sound almost human sometimes." "That wasn't a coyote," Sarah said flatly. The scream came again, closer this time, and then again from a different direction. Soon we were hearing them from all around us. Terrible, agonized shrieks that seemed to echo off the bluffs and multiply in the darkness. "We should leave," Sarah said, standing up. "Right now. Pack up and hike back to the car." "In the dark?" Marcus shook his head. "On these trails? We'd break our necks. Besides, it's probably just—" Another scream, so close it sounded like it came from just beyond the tree line. This time, we could hear something else underneath it, a wet, tearing sound that made my stomach lurch. "Jesus Christ," Tommy breathed. "What is that?" I was already reaching for my flashlight when the screaming stopped. The sudden silence was somehow worse than the noise had been. We sat there for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, straining to hear any sound from the darkness beyond our small circle of firelight. "Maybe it's over," Jake whispered. That's when we heard the footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, circling our camp just outside the range of the fire. Not the quick patter of a deer or the padding of a coyote, but the measured tread of something large walking on two legs. Something that wanted us to know it was there. "Hello," Marcus called out, his voice cracking. "Is someone out there?" The footsteps stopped. We waited, barely breathing. Then, from the darkness maybe 30 feet away, came a voice. Human, but wrong somehow. The words were clear, but the tone was flat, emotionless. "Help me? Who's there?" Marcus stood up, grabbing a flashlight. "Are you hurt?" "Help me," the voice repeated, from a different location now. Closer. Marcus aimed his flashlight toward the sound and clicked it on. The beam cut through the darkness but showed only trees and shadows. No person, nothing moving. "Help me," came the voice again, from behind us now. We spun around, all of us pointing our lights in different directions. Nothing, just the dark forest and that overwhelming smell of decay. "This is fucked," Tommy said, grabbing his pack. "I don't care about the dark. We're leaving, now." But as he stood up, his flashlight beam swept across something that made us all gasp. About 50 feet away, barely visible between the trees, was a figure. Tall, impossibly thin, standing perfectly still with its back to us. "Hey," Marcus called out. "Do you need help?" The figure didn't respond, didn't move. Marcus took a step toward it. "Hey, can you hear me?" That's when the figure began to turn around. It moved slowly, mechanically, like a mannequin being rotated. As it turned, we could see that something was terribly wrong with its proportions. The arms were too long, hanging down past where its knees should be. The torso was stretched, elongated, and when it finally faced us completely, we saw that where its face should have been was just a smooth expanse of pale skin. "Run," Sarah whispered. "Run right fucking now." But none of us could move. We stood there transfixed as the thing began walking toward us with that same mechanical gait. Each step covered an impossible distance, as if it were gliding rather than walking. Then it opened its mouth. The jaw unhinged like a snake's, revealing rows of yellowed teeth that went back farther than any mouth should. The scream that came out was the same one we'd been hearing all night, but magnified, so loud it seemed to shake the trees. We ran. I don't remember grabbing my pack or putting out the fire. One moment we were standing frozen by that thing's horrible scream. The next, we were crashing through the forest in complete darkness, branches whipping at our faces and roots catching our feet. Behind us, the screaming continued, joined by other voices. The sound of something large moving through the trees, getting closer. "The trail!" Marcus shouted over the noise. "Find the trail." But in our panic, we'd become completely disoriented. The flashlight beams swung wildly, showing only an endless maze of trees and underbrush. I could hear the others breathing hard, stumbling, cursing as they fought their way through the forest. We ran for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes before Tommy suddenly cried out and disappeared. One moment he was right beside me. The next, there was just empty space and the sound of something falling. "Tommy!" I stopped, shining my light around frantically. "Tommy!" "Down here." His voice came from below and to my left. "I fell into some kind of ravine." We gathered at the edge of what looked like a natural depression in the forest floor, maybe 8 feet deep and lined with loose rocks. Tommy was at the bottom, holding his ankle and grimacing. "I think it's sprained," he said, "but I can walk on it." Marcus and Jake climbed down to help him up while Sarah and I kept watch. The screaming had stopped again, but I could still hear movement in the trees around us. Slow, deliberate, like something was stalking us. "We need to find shelter," Sarah said, "somewhere we can defend ourselves." "What the hell is that thing?" Jake asked as he and Marcus helped Tommy out of the ravine. "I don't know," Marcus said, but I could hear doubt in his voice. Like maybe he did know, or at least suspected. We moved more carefully now, staying close together and following what seemed like a game trail through the forest. Tommy was limping but keeping up, gritting his teeth against the pain. The forest around us felt alive, full of watching eyes and hidden movement. It was Jake who spotted the structure first, a dark shape looming against the tree line, barely visible in our flashlight beams. "Is that a building?" he whispered. As we got closer, we could see it was some kind of old cabin, maybe a hunting lodge or forestry station. The roof was partially collapsed and the windows were boarded up, but the walls looked solid. More importantly, it had a door. "This isn't on the map," Marcus said, studying his trail guide. "I don't care," Sarah said. "It's shelter." The door was unlocked, hanging slightly open on rusted hinges. Inside, our flashlights revealed a single room with a stone fireplace, a few pieces of rotting furniture and debris scattered across the floor. It smelled musty and abandoned, but compared to the overwhelming stench of decay outside, it was almost pleasant. "Block the door," Tommy said, collapsing onto an old wooden chair. "Use that table." We dragged a heavy table across the room and wedged it against the door. It wasn't much, but it made us feel slightly safer. I found some old newspapers and managed to get a small fire going in the fireplace, more for psychological comfort than warmth. "Okay," Marcus said once we'd settled down. "Let's think about this rationally. What did we actually see out there?" "Are you serious?" Sarah stared at him. "We saw some kind of monster. That thing wasn't human." "People can look strange in bad lighting," Marcus said, but even he didn't sound convinced. "Shadows, perspective, fear. They can all play tricks on your perception." "What about the screaming?" I asked. "What about the way it moved?" Marcus didn't have an answer for that. We sat in uneasy silence for a while, listening to the wind in the trees outside. I was starting to think maybe we'd overreacted, maybe it really had just been some confused hiker, or... That's when we heard the scratching. It started at one of the boarded windows, a slow, deliberate scraping like fingernails on wood. Then another window. Then the walls. Soon, the entire cabin was surrounded by the sound of something, or several somethings, trying to claw their way inside. "What do we do?" Tommy whispered. "Stay quiet," Marcus said. "Wait it out." But the scratching only got louder, more frantic. I could hear wood splintering, nails being pulled from boards. Whatever was out there was getting in. Then the sounds stopped. We waited, barely breathing, for something to happen. Minutes passed. Nothing. "Maybe they gave up," Jake whispered. That's when something heavy hit the roof. The entire cabin shook with the impact. Dust and debris rained down from the ceiling. Then another impact, and another, like something was jumping up and down on the roof, trying to break through. "The fireplace," Sarah said, pointing at the chimney. "It could come down the fireplace." We all turned to look at the dark opening of the fireplace. The small fire I'd built was barely burning, just a few glowing embers that cast weird shadows on the stone walls. As we watched, a piece of debris fell down the chimney and scattered the coals. Then we heard breathing. Slow, deep, coming from somewhere above us in the chimney. The sound of something large trying to squeeze itself down a space too small for its body. "We have to get out of here," Tommy said, struggling to his feet. "Where?" Marcus asked. "It's everywhere." But as he spoke, I noticed something. The scratching at the windows had stopped. The pounding on the roof had stopped. Even the breathing in the chimney was gone. "Listen," I whispered. Complete silence. No wind, no insect sounds, nothing. Like the entire forest was holding its breath. Then, from somewhere very close by, came a voice we all recognized. "Guys, where are you? I'm lost." It was Tommy's voice, but Tommy was sitting right next to me. "Guys, I need help. I think I'm hurt." The voice was coming from outside the cabin, maybe just a few feet from the door. Tommy's voice, but not quite right. The cadence was off, the inflection strange. We all looked at Tommy, who was staring at the door with his mouth hanging open. "That's not me," he whispered. "Guys, please. I'm scared. Something's out here." The voice was closer now, right outside the door. I could hear footsteps on the wooden porch, the creak of old boards. "Let me in. Please. Someone. Something." Tried the door handle. The table we'd placed in front of it scraped against the floor as whatever was outside pushed against the door. "I'm hurt. I need help." The voice was changing now, becoming less human with each word. The words themselves were still clear, but underneath them was something else. A wet, chittering sound like insects crawling over each other. "Let me in," it said again, and this time the voice was completely wrong. Still recognizably Tommy's, but distorted, like a recording being played at the wrong speed. "Don't," Marcus said when Jake started to stand up. "Don't open it." "But what if?" "That's not Tommy," Sarah said firmly. "Tommy's right here. Look at him." The thing outside the door began pounding now, rattling the walls. But it was still using Tommy's voice, pleading, begging, crying. The sounds it made were so human, so desperate, that every instinct screamed at us to help. "Please," it sobbed. "I'm dying out here. Please help me." Tommy was crying now, tears streaming down his face as he listened to his own voice begging for help. "Make it stop," he whispered. "Please make it stop." The pounding continued for maybe 20 minutes, accompanied by that horrible pleading in Tommy's voice. Then, as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. We waited, afraid to move or speak. Finally, Marcus crept over to one of the boarded windows and peered through a crack between the boards. "I don't see anything," he whispered. "It could be a trick," Sarah said. But as the minutes passed and nothing happened, we began to relax slightly. Whatever had been outside seemed to be gone, at least for now. "We need to leave," I said. "At first light, we pack up and get the hell out of here." "Agreed," Marcus said. "We'll take turns keeping watch, 2 hours each." I volunteered for the first watch along with Sarah. The others tried to get some sleep on the floor, using their packs as pillows, but I could tell none of them were really sleeping. Every small sound made them flinch. Every creak of the old cabin made them tense. The hours passed slowly. Sarah and I sat by the dying fire, whispering occasionally but mostly just listening to the silence outside. Around 3 in the morning, she nudged me and pointed toward the fireplace. "Did you see that?" "What?" Something moved in the chimney. I stared up at the dark opening but couldn't see anything. "Probably just bats," I whispered. But she was right. There was something up there. I could hear it now, a soft scrabbling sound like claws on stone. Something was definitely in the chimney, but it wasn't coming down. It was just waiting. Jake and Marcus took the next watch, and Sarah and I tried to get some rest. But every time I closed my eyes, I could hear that voice outside the door, Tommy's voice begging to be let in. I couldn't shake the image of whatever was out there, wearing Tommy's voice like a mask. I must have dozed off despite my fear, because the next thing I knew, Tommy was shaking me awake. "Daniel, Daniel, wake up." I opened my eyes and saw him leaning over me, but something was wrong with his face. His skin looked pale, almost gray, and his eyes were bloodshot. "What is it?" I asked, sitting up. "I need to go outside," he said. "I need to pee, and I can't hold it anymore." "Are you crazy? After what happened last night?" "I'll just go behind the cabin. Quick and quiet. You can watch the door." I looked around the cabin. Jake was asleep near the fireplace. Marcus was slumped against the wall, also sleeping. Sarah was... "Where's Sarah?" I asked. Tommy looked confused. "What do you mean?" "She was on watch with Marcus. Where is she?" We both looked around the cabin more carefully. Sarah's pack was still there, her sleeping bag laid out by the far wall, but Sarah herself was nowhere to be seen. "Marcus," I said, shaking him awake. "Marcus, where's Sarah?" He jerked awake, looking around wildly. "What? She's right. She was just..." He trailed off as he realized she wasn't there. "When did you last see her?" I asked. "She was here when I started my watch around 5. We were talking about..." He stopped, looking confused. "I don't remember. I must have fallen asleep." "Sarah," Jake called out, now awake as well. "Sarah." No answer. We searched the cabin thoroughly, though there really wasn't anywhere to hide. She was simply gone. The door was still barricaded, the windows still boarded up. It was as if she'd simply vanished. "Maybe she went outside to use the bathroom," Tommy suggested, "like I need to do." "Without saying anything? Leaving all her gear?" Marcus shook his head. "No way. Sarah's too smart for that." "Then where is she?" Jake asked. I looked up at the fireplace. The chimney was narrow, but not impossibly so. A person could squeeze up there if they had to. "The chimney," I said. "Maybe she climbed up the chimney." "Why would she do that?" Marcus asked. But even as he spoke, we could all hear it. A faint sound from above. Scratching, like fingernails on stone. And underneath it, barely audible. A voice. "Help me." Sarah's voice, but wrong. Just like Tommy's had been wrong the night before. "Guys, I'm stuck up here. I can't get down." We all looked at each other. The voice was definitely coming from the chimney, but it sounded strange. Echoey and distorted. "Sarah," Marcus called. "What are you doing up there?" "I heard something on the roof. I thought I could get up there and see what it was. But now, I'm stuck." "Okay, stay calm," Marcus said. "We'll figure out how to get you down." But I was remembering the sound we'd heard the night before. Something breathing in the chimney, something large trying to squeeze down a space too small for its body. "Marcus," I said quietly. "That thing last night. It was in the chimney." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that might not be Sarah." "Help me," the voice called again. "Please, I'm hurt." Tommy was moving toward the fireplace. "We have to help her," he said. "Don't," I said, grabbing his arm. "Think about last night. That thing used your voice. How do we know this isn't the same thing?" "Because that's my girlfriend up there," Marcus said angrily. "And she needs help." He grabbed a flashlight and shined it up the chimney. The beam revealed the narrow stone passage, but nothing else. No sign of Sarah. "Sarah, can you see my light?" he called. "Yes," came the response, but it sounded farther away now. "But I can't move. I think my leg is trapped." "We need rope," Marcus said. "Something to pull her down with." "Wait," I said. "Just wait a minute. If she climbed up there, when did she do it? I was on watch until 3, then Jake and Marcus until 5. When did she have time to climb up a chimney without anyone noticing?" "Maybe she did it during your watch and you fell asleep," Jake suggested. "I didn't fall asleep. And besides, why would she do something so stupid?" "Help me," the voice called again, and this time I could hear it clearly. It wasn't coming from the chimney at all. It was coming from outside the cabin, somewhere near the roof. "That's not coming from the chimney," I said. "It's coming from outside." Marcus aimed his flashlight up the chimney again, calling Sarah's name. No response this time. "Sarah," he called. "Sarah, answer me." Nothing. Tommy was looking pale, sweating despite the cool air. "Guys, I really need to go outside. I can't wait anymore." "You're not going anywhere," I said. "None of us are leaving this cabin until daylight." But Tommy was already moving toward the door, pushing the table aside. "Tommy, don't," Jake said. "I'll be quick, just behind the cabin and right back." He had the door open before any of us could stop him. The early morning light was beginning to filter through the trees, but it was still mostly dark outside. "5 minutes," Tommy said. "If I'm not back in 5 minutes, don't come looking for me." He stepped outside and closed the door behind him. We waited, watching through the cracks in the boarded windows. I could see Tommy walking around the side of the cabin, moving carefully in the dim light. "This is insane," Marcus muttered. "We should all stick together." "He'll be fine," Jake said. "It's almost dawn. Things seem less threatening in the daylight." But even as he spoke, we heard Tommy scream. Not the strange, inhuman screaming from the night before. This was definitely Tommy, definitely real, and definitely terrified. The scream cut off abruptly, replaced by a wet, tearing sound. "Tommy!" Marcus yanked the door open and ran outside. "Marcus, don't!" I called, but he was already gone. Jake and I looked at each other. We could hear Marcus calling Tommy's name somewhere outside, his voice getting farther away. "We have to go after them," Jake said. "No," I said. "We wait here. This is what it wants, to separate us." But Jake was already heading for the door. "I'm not leaving them out there." And then I was alone in the cabin. I sat there for maybe 10 minutes, listening to the sounds from outside. Voices calling, branches breaking, the occasional scream. But I couldn't tell if the voices were real or if that thing was using them to lure me out. Then everything went quiet. I waited another 10 minutes, then crept to one of the windows and peered through a gap in the boards. I could see the forest in the gray pre-dawn light, but no sign of my friends. That's when I heard footsteps on the porch. Slow, deliberate, like someone trying to be quiet. They stopped right outside the door. "Daniel?" It was Marcus's voice. "Daniel, it's okay. You can come out now." I didn't answer. "Daniel, we found Sarah. She's hurt, but she's alive. We need your help to carry her." The voice was perfect, exactly like Marcus, down to the slight accent from his childhood in California. But I remembered what had happened with Tommy's voice the night before. "Where did we meet?" I called out. A pause, then, "College, UC Berkeley. We were roommates freshman year." That was correct. But that information was probably in Marcus's wallet, or could have been overheard from our conversations. "What was the name of the girl you had a crush on sophomore year?" Another pause, longer this time. "I don't remember. Daniel, this is ridiculous. Just open the door." Marcus would have remembered. Her name was Jessica Chen. No relation to him, which had been a constant source of jokes. He'd never forgotten that name. "You're not Marcus," I said. "Daniel, please. Sarah's bleeding. She needs help." "Prove you're Marcus. Tell me something only he would know." I can't think right now. I'm scared, man. Just please open the door." The voice was getting agitated now, less controlled. Underneath Marcus's familiar tone, I could hear something else. Something hungry. "Please," it said again, and this time I could hear the wrongness clearly. The voice was starting to distort, becoming deeper, more guttural. I backed away from the door as something began pounding on it. The whole cabin shook with each impact, much harder than anything human could produce. Then it stopped. Silence again. I waited, holding my breath, for something else to happen. Minutes passed. Nothing. Finally, I worked up the courage to look out the window again. The forest was lighter now, true dawn beginning to break through the trees. And there, about 50 feet from the cabin, I could see them. Marcus, Jake, Tommy, and Sarah, all standing in a line at the edge of the tree line. They were perfectly still, facing the cabin, and even from this distance I could tell something was wrong with them. Their proportions were off, stretched and distorted like the figure we'd seen the first night. Their arms hung too low, their torsos too long, and their faces. Even from 50 feet away, I could see that their faces were wrong, smooth, featureless, like mannequins. As I watched, they began walking toward the cabin in perfect synchronization, that same mechanical gait I'd seen before. I didn't wait to see what would happen when they reached the door. I grabbed my pack and ran for the fireplace. The chimney was narrow, but I'd always been thin. If Sarah had really gotten up there somehow, maybe I could too. I could hear them reaching the cabin as I started climbing. Multiple sets of footsteps on the porch, the sound of the door being torn off its hinges. But their voices were what terrified me most. All of them calling my name at once, a horrible chorus of familiar voices that weren't quite right. The chimney was a nightmare. Narrow, rough stone that scraped my back and chest as I inched upward. Twice I almost fell, my feet slipping on the crumbling mortar. But the sounds from below kept me moving. Furniture being overturned, wood splintering, and underneath it all, that chorus of voices calling my name. I reached the top just as something grabbed at my feet. I could hear them in the chimney below me, climbing after me with an inhuman speed that scraped stone and mortar loose. The roof was partially collapsed, but stable enough to support my weight. I could see the forest spread out below me in the gray dawn light, and in the distance, the outline of what had to be the fire tower Marcus had been looking for. Behind me, something was emerging from the chimney. I didn't look back, just ran across the roof and jumped. I landed hard in a pile of old leaves, feeling something twist in my ankle. But I kept running, crashing through the underbrush toward what I hoped was the fire tower. Behind me, I could hear them giving chase. Not just the sound of running footsteps, but something else. The snapping of branches, the thud of heavy bodies moving through the forest faster than anything human should be able to move. I reached the fire tower just as the sun cleared the horizon. It was an old steel structure, maybe 60 feet tall, with a small cabin at the top. Just as the Wikipedia article had said, it was fenced off and supposedly closed to the public due to vandalism and safety concerns. But the fence had a hole cut in it, and the padlock on the gate was broken. I scrambled up the tower's steel ladder, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the rungs. About halfway up, I looked back and saw them emerging from the tree line. They weren't my friends anymore. I could see that clearly now in the daylight. The things that walked out of the forest were tall, skeletal, with gray skin stretched tight over elongated bones. Their faces were blank, featureless, but as I watched, features began to appear. Marcus's nose, Sarah's eyes, Tommy's mouth, Jake's jawline. They were changing, becoming perfect copies of my friends, but their movements remained wrong. Too fluid, too fast, like insects pretending to be human. I reached the top of the tower and slammed the cabin door behind me, though I knew it wouldn't hold them for long. The small room was filled with broken glass and debris, but there was still an old radio on a shelf by the window. I tried it desperately, spinning through frequencies. Nothing but static. But then, on what must have been an emergency frequency, I heard a voice. "This is Iowa State Patrol Dispatch. Is anyone out there?" "Help me," I screamed into the radio. "I'm at Yellow River State Forest in the fire tower. There's something in the woods, something that—" "Calm down, sir. What's your location exactly?" "The fire tower, in Yellow River State Forest. Send help." "Sir, Yellow River State Forest has been closed to the public for 2 weeks due to a wildlife disease outbreak. How did you get in there?" Before I could answer, I heard the sound of metal on metal. They were climbing the tower. "They're coming," I whispered into the radio. "They look like my friends, but they're not. There's something else." "Sir, I'm dispatching units to your location. Stay where you are and—" The radio went dead. I could hear them on the ladder now, climbing with impossible speed. In moments they would be at the top, and there was nowhere left to run. But as I pressed myself against the far wall of the cabin, something happened that I still don't fully understand. The sun, now fully above the horizon, began streaming through the broken windows, and where the light touched the walls, I could see marks scratched into the wood, symbols carved deep into the wooden planks. Not random marks, but deliberate patterns that seemed to shift and move in the sunlight, and among them, words carved in a shaky hand. It hungers, it waits, it takes. Below that, in different handwriting, fed the earth 1933, woke when they dug, sleeps in winter, hungry in fall. And finally, in fresh scratches that looked recent, Sarah Chen, 10-15-24. Marcus Williams, 10-15-24. Tommy Martinez, 10-15-24. Jake Adams, 10-15-24. My friends' names were wrong. Today was October 18th. We'd only arrived yesterday. Unless... I heard the cabin door rattle. They were here. But as the first of them stepped into the cabin, the sunlight hit it full on. The thing that looked like Marcus screamed. Not with Marcus's voice, but with something ancient and hungry and wrong. Its false human appearance wavered like heat shimmer, revealing something underneath that made my mind recoil. The others crowded behind it, but they too seemed unable to enter the small space. The sunlight, the symbols, something was keeping them at bay. "Daniel," the Marcus thing said, its voice layered with harmonics that hurt to hear. "Come with us. Join us. It's easier if you don't fight." "What are you?" I whispered. "Hungry," it said simply. So hungry. Empty for so long. "What happened to my friends?" The thing smiled with Marcus's face, but the expression was wrong. Predatory. They fed the earth. Now they feed us. Now they call to others, as we called to them. I understood then. This thing, this Wendigo, or whatever it was, had been here long before Yellow River State Forest was established. The Civilian Conservation Corps had dug it up in 1933, and it had been feeding ever since, taking campers, hikers, anyone who wandered into its territory, using their voices, their appearances, to lure in more victims. "Your friends are still alive," it said, as if reading my thoughts. "Inside us. Part of us. You can join them." I pressed myself further against the wall, but there was nowhere to go. The sunlight was moving as the sun climbed higher, and soon the protective symbols would be in shadow. That's when I heard the helicopters. The sound came from the south, growing louder by the second, and then voices shouting through megaphones. "This is the Iowa State Patrol. The area is under quarantine. Anyone in the forest needs to evacuate immediately." The things that had been my friends looked toward the sound, their attention divided. In that moment of distraction, I saw my chance. I grabbed a piece of broken glass from the floor and held it up so the sunlight reflected off its surface, casting bright beams around the cabin. Where the reflected light hit the creatures, they screamed and stumbled backward. "Can't take the light, can you?" I said, advancing toward them with my improvised weapon. They retreated toward the door, but the cabin was small and there wasn't much room to maneuver. I kept the reflected sunlight on them, driving them back onto the platform outside. That's when I made my mistake. As I reached the door, trying to force them down the ladder, the Sarah thing grabbed my wrist. Its grip was like iron, inhumanly strong, and I felt the glass slip from my fingers. "Now you join us," it said with Sarah's voice. But instead of pulling me toward it, something unexpected happened. The creature screamed and let go, stumbling backward. Where it had touched my skin, I could see burn marks on its gray flesh. I looked down at my wrist and saw my watch. The face was reflecting sunlight directly into the creature's eyes. I ripped the watch off and held it up like a shield, using the reflection to drive them back. They scrambled down the ladder, screaming and chittering, their human disguises falling away completely. By the time the helicopters arrived, they were gone, melted back into the forest like shadows. But I could still hear them out there, calling with the voices of my friends, begging for help, trying to lure the rescue teams into the woods. The State Patrol found me on the tower 3 hours later, nearly catatonic with fear and exposure. They said I was suffering from hypothermia and severe dehydration, that I'd been hallucinating. The official report listed my friends as missing, presumed dead in a hiking accident. But I know what really happened, and I know they're still out there. The Forest Service claims Yellow River State Forest remains closed due to a wildlife disease outbreak. But I've done my research. There have been disappearances there for decades. Groups of hikers who vanish without a trace, leaving behind only abandoned campsites and personal belongings. Sometimes other hikers report hearing voices in the woods, familiar voices calling for help, voices of people who were reported missing weeks or months earlier. The thing that took my friends is still hungry, still waiting, and every fall, when the leaves turn and the air gets cold, it wakes up and starts hunting again. I've tried to warn people, but no one listens. The Forest Service just repeats their story about disease outbreaks and temporary closures. And Yellow River State Forest stays open to the public, welcoming new hikers every season. I still get phone calls sometimes, late at night, usually around 3 in the morning. The caller ID shows blocked numbers, but when I answer, I hear voices I recognize. "Daniel, it's Marcus. We're still here in the forest. We're waiting for you to come back." "Daniel, it's Sarah. Why did you leave us? We need you." "Come back, Daniel. Come back and join us." I've changed my number 4 times now, but the calls keep coming. Because whatever that thing is, it has their memories, their voices, their knowledge of who I am and how to find me. Sometimes I think about going back. Not to join them, but to try to find a way to destroy the thing that took them. But I know that's exactly what it wants. It's patient, cunning, willing to wait as long as it takes for me to return to its hunting ground. So I stay away. I've moved to Arizona, as far from Iowa as I can get while staying in the continental U.S. I avoid forests, camping, anything that reminds me of that weekend in October. But I know it's still out there, still hungry, still wearing the faces of my friends and using their voices to call for help. And someday, when my guard is down or my resolve weakens, I know I'll hear those voices calling to me again. And maybe, just maybe, I'll be weak enough to answer. The thing in Yellow River State Forest is patient. It can wait. After all, it's been hungry for almost a century. What's a few more years? My name is Michael Williams, and I am 29 years old. This happened in the remote backcountry of Backbone State Park, Iowa, 3 months ago. I should have listened to the park ranger's warning about the restricted trails. Should have paid attention to the way his weathered face went pale when I mentioned our planned route through the Devil's Backbone Ridge. Should have noticed how his hand trembled slightly as he handed back our permits, or how he kept glancing toward the dense woodland that stretched beyond the main camping areas. But I was too caught up in the excitement of finally getting my college friends together for our annual camping trip. It had been 2 years since our last adventure, and with everyone scattered across different states now, this felt like our last chance to recapture those carefree days before careers and responsibilities consumed us entirely. The group was smaller this time. Just 4 of us. Me, Sarah Rodriguez, my best friend since freshman year who could start a fire in a thunderstorm, Jake Carter, the perpetual jokester who somehow always knew exactly what to say when things got serious, and Rebecca Hill, quiet, observant Becca who had a talent for finding the most beautiful hidden spots wherever we went. We'd chosen Backbone State Park specifically because of its reputation for challenging terrain and genuine wilderness experience. The Devil's Backbone Ridge was a 6-mile stretch of limestone cliffs and dense forest that promised the kind of isolation we craved after months of city living. What we hadn't expected was how completely cut off from civilization we'd become. The first sign something was wrong came on our second day, when my phone died despite showing a full charge that morning. Then Jake's GPS unit started giving impossible readings, showing our location as simultaneously 3 different places, none of which matched our actual position on the paper map. "Technology, man," Jake laughed, shaking his device. "Guess we're doing this old school." Sarah spread out her paper map on a flat boulder, frowning at the topographical lines. "This doesn't make sense either. According to this, we should be able to see Clear Creek from here, but..." She gestured toward the valley below, where nothing but dense forest stretched endlessly. Maybe we took a wrong turn somewhere, I suggested, though I knew we'd been following the marked trail religiously. Becca had been unusually quiet all morning, standing at the edge of our small clearing and staring into the woods with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Do you guys hear that?" We all stopped what we were doing and listened. The forest around us was completely silent. No bird songs, no rustling leaves, no distant creek water. Even the wind seemed to have died completely. "Hear what?" Sarah asked. "That's just it," Becca said, turning back to us with wide eyes. "Nothing. No sounds at all. When's the last time you've been in a forest this quiet?" She was right, and the realization sent a chill down my spine. Forests were never completely silent. There should have been dozens of small sounds. Insects, birds, small animals moving through the underbrush. But here, the silence pressed against us like a physical weight. Jake tried to lighten the mood. "Maybe we're just in a dead zone. Some places are naturally quieter than others, right?" But even he sounded uncertain, and I noticed how he kept glancing over his shoulder as if expecting to see something following us. We decided to press on, hoping to reach the planned campsite by evening. The trail became increasingly difficult to follow, sometimes disappearing entirely for long stretches. We found ourselves navigating by compass and instinct, pushing through increasingly dense undergrowth that seemed to grow thicker with each step. By late afternoon, we were hopelessly lost. "I say we backtrack," Sarah suggested as we stopped for water at what might have been our third time encountering the same fallen log. "Find the main trail and camp there tonight." "Which direction is back?" Jake asked, and we all realized none of us could say for certain. The dense canopy above us blocked out most of the sky, making it impossible to determine the sun's position. "We need to find high ground," I said, fighting down the panic that was starting to claw at my chest. "Get above the tree line and figure out where we are." Becca pointed to a steep ridge visible through the trees. "That way. If we can get to the top, we should be able to see the main park roads." The climb was brutal. The slope was much steeper than it had appeared from below, and the ground was treacherous. Loose rocks and hidden holes that seemed designed to catch unwary feet. Jake slipped twice, the second time badly enough that he scraped his palm raw against the rough limestone. "Maybe we should wait until morning," he said, examining the blood seeping through his torn skin. "This is getting dangerous." But the alternative, spending the night lost in these unnaturally quiet woods, seemed worse. We pressed on as the light began to fade, finally reaching what we hoped was the ridge's summit, just as the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the trees. What we found there defied explanation. We stood on a narrow promontory of limestone, maybe 30 feet long and 10 feet wide. On 3 sides, the ground dropped away into darkness, but it was the 4th side that stopped us cold. Instead of the forest we'd just climbed through, we were looking down at an identical promontory, maybe 50 feet below us, where 4 figures stood in exactly the same positions we were standing in. "What the hell?" Jake whispered. The figures below weren't moving, just standing there like statues. In the growing darkness, it was impossible to make out details, but their proportions were wrong somehow. Too tall, too thin, joints bending at angles that human joints shouldn't bend. Sarah grabbed my arm, her fingers digging in so hard I knew there would be bruises. "Michael, those aren't people." As if responding to her voice, all 4 figures below us turned their heads in perfect unison to look up at us. Even from 50 feet away, I could see their eyes, pale, reflective, and completely without pupils. We ran. I don't remember much about our descent from the ridge, just a panicked scramble through tearing brambles and over treacherous rocks. We ran until our lungs burned and our legs gave out, finally collapsing in a small clearing beside what looked like an old logging road. "What were those things?" Becca gasped, her face streaked with tears and blood from the thorns. None of us had an answer. We sat in silence for several minutes, listening to our own ragged breathing and trying to process what we'd seen. "Mirror images," Sarah said finally. They were standing exactly like us. Same positions, same heights. Those weren't mirror images, Jake said firmly. Mirror images don't have eyes like that. And they don't. He stopped suddenly, his face going white. What? I demanded. Listen. In the distance, barely audible, came the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, and coming from the direction we'd fled. But there was something wrong with the rhythm. It sounded like more than 4 sets of feet, and they weren't quite synchronized, creating an unsettling echo effect. We need to find shelter, I said, forcing myself to think practically despite the terror coursing through my veins. Somewhere defensible. The old logging road led to an abandoned ranger station, a small cabin with boarded windows and a roof that was mostly intact. The door hung open on broken hinges, and the interior smelled of rot and animal droppings, but it was better than being exposed in the open. We barricaded the door with an old table and settled in to wait for morning, taking turns keeping watch through the gaps in the boarded windows. Jake's injured hand had swollen badly, and by the light of our small flashlight we could see red streaks beginning to creep up his arm. Infection, Sarah said grimly. We need to get him to a hospital. First, we need to find our way out of here, I replied, though privately I was wondering if that was even possible anymore. Every rational part of my mind insisted that we were simply lost, that the figures on the ridge had been a trick of the light and our own fear. But I couldn't shake the memory of those pale, pupilless eyes. The footsteps circled our hiding place all night. They never came close enough for us to see what made them, but we could hear them out there in the darkness, sometimes near, sometimes distant, but always present. The sound was wrong in a way I couldn't articulate. Too light for the size we'd glimpsed on the ridge, but with an odd weight behind each step, as if whoever was walking was trying very hard to remember how walking was supposed to work. Around 3 a.m, Becca shook my shoulder during my watch shift. "Michael," she whispered, "look at Jake." I turned my flashlight toward where Jake lay sleeping in the corner. He was perfectly still, not even breathing that I could see. But that wasn't what made my blood freeze. It was his face. Even in sleep, his eyes were wide open and staring at the ceiling, unblinking. "Jake," I called softly. No response. I crawled over and shook his shoulder gently. His skin was cold to the touch, far too cold for someone who'd been wrapped in a sleeping bag. When I shook him harder, his head lolled to the side with a loose, boneless movement that no living neck should make. "Jake!" His eyes snapped to mine with mechanical precision, and he smiled. It was Jake's face, Jake's mouth, but the smile was too wide, stretching his lips past their natural limits. When he spoke, his voice was perfectly normal, which somehow made it infinitely worse. "I'm fine, Michael. Never been better. Why don't you go back to sleep?" I scrambled backward, my flashlight beam wavering. "Sarah! Becca!" They were already awake, pressed against the far wall and staring at Jake with undisguised horror. Sarah had her hand over her mouth, fighting back what might have been vomit or screams. Jake sat up in one fluid motion, his movements unnaturally smooth. The sleeping bag fell away, revealing that his injured hand was no longer swollen or infected. In fact, the cuts were completely gone, the skin pale and unmarked. "What's wrong?" he asked, tilting his head at an angle that was almost, but not quite, human. "Don't you recognize me?" "You're not Jake," Becca whispered. The thing wearing Jake's face considered this for a moment, then shrugged. "Does it matter? I have his memories, his voice, his face. What makes someone real, anyway?" It stood up, and I realized it was taller than Jake had been. Not by much, maybe an inch or two, but enough to make it seem wrong in a fundamental way. Its limbs were too long, its proportions subtly off, like a photograph that had been stretched vertically. "I know all about you," it continued conversationally. "Michael, 29, works in accounting, afraid of commitment. Sarah, 28, kindergarten teacher, still dreams about her ex-boyfriend David. Becca, 27, graphic designer, secretly thinks she's going crazy and has been for months. The accuracy of these details was almost as terrifying as the creature itself. These were things Jake knew about us, intimate fears and secrets we'd shared during long nights around campfires over the years. "Where is he?" Sarah demanded, finding her voice. "What did you do with Jake?" The thing smiled wider, if that was possible. "Oh, he's still here, mostly. Want to say hello?" Its voice shifted, becoming Jake's panicked whisper. "Mike, help me. I can't." Then back to that horrible, too calm tone. "He's learning to share. It's quite educational for both of us." I don't remember making the decision to run. One moment we were pressed against the wall, the next we were tearing apart our barricade and fleeing into the night. Behind us, I could hear Jake's laughter, or the thing's laughter using Jake's vocal cords, following us into the darkness. We ran blindly through the forest, guided only by our flashlights and the desperate need to put distance between ourselves and whatever had taken our friend. Branches tore at our clothes and faces, and more than once we stumbled over hidden obstacles, but we didn't dare slow down. It was Sarah who noticed we were being herded. "Michael, stop!" she gasped, grabbing my arm. "Look around us." I stopped and swept my flashlight in a circle. We were in another clearing, almost identical to the one where we'd first made camp 2 days ago. But that was impossible. We'd been running in what felt like a straight line for at least 20 minutes. "This is where we started," Becca said, her voice hollow with despair. "We're back where we started." "No," Sarah said, studying the trees around us. "Look closer. Same size clearing, same arrangement of rocks, but different trees. It's like a copy." She was right. The details were wrong. Subtle differences in the placement of fallen logs, the pattern of moss on the rocks, the species of trees surrounding us. As if someone had tried to recreate our original campsite from memory but had gotten the details slightly off. "It's playing with us," I realized, leading us in circles, showing us what it wants us to see. "How do we fight something like that?" Becca asked. Before I could answer, we heard Jake's voice calling from the darkness beyond the trees. "Guys, where did you go? I'm hurt. I need help." It was perfect. Exactly the right tone of pain and confusion. Exactly how Jake would sound if he were injured and afraid. If I hadn't seen what had happened to him back at the cabin, I would have run toward that voice without hesitation. "Please," the voice continued, moving around the perimeter of the clearing. "I don't know what happened. 1 minute I was sleeping, and then I woke up alone. My hand. Something's wrong with my hand." Sarah whimpered, and I could see her fighting the urge to respond. Even knowing it wasn't really Jake, the sound of his distress was almost impossible to ignore. "It's using our emotions against us," I whispered. "Don't listen." But the voice was getting closer, and with it came other sounds. Footsteps, yes, but also something else. A wet, sliding noise like something being dragged across the ground. "I'm bleeding," Jake's voice called, now close enough that we should have been able to see him. "There's so much blood. Why won't you help me?" The footsteps stopped at the edge of the clearing just beyond the reach of our flashlight beams. For a long moment, there was silence. Then we heard breathing, deep, ragged inhalations that went on far too long, as if whatever was breathing had lungs much larger than a human's should be. "I can smell you," it said, and now the voice was wrong, still recognizably Jake's, but distorted, like a recording played at the wrong speed. "I can smell your fear. It's delicious." A branch snapped in the darkness and something pale moved between the trees. In the brief glimpse afforded by my flashlight, I saw what might have been a hand, but the fingers were too long, with too many joints, and the nails had grown into black, curved claws. "Run," I breathed. We scattered, each choosing a different direction, hoping to confuse whatever was hunting us. I crashed through the underbrush, my flashlight beam swinging wildly, casting nightmarish shadows that seemed to move independently of their sources. Behind me, I heard Sarah scream, I turned and ran toward the sound, crashing through a stand of young saplings to find her backing away from something I couldn't quite see. It was tall and pale, moving with that same unnatural fluidity I'd seen in the cabin, but in the darkness and confusion, my mind refused to process its full shape. "Sarah, this way." She turned and ran toward me, but the thing was faster. It reached out with one impossibly long arm and its clawed fingers wrapped around her ankle. She went down hard, her flashlight spinning away into the bushes. I did the only thing I could think of. I charged forward and drove my shoulder into the creature's midsection. It was like hitting a tree that had learned to walk. The impact sent shockwaves up my spine, but the thing barely staggered. Up close, I could see it more clearly, and what I saw drove rational thought from my mind. It still looked like Jake, but stretched and distorted, as if someone had tried to rebuild him from imperfect memory. His familiar features were there, but wrong. Eyes too far apart, mouth too wide, skin that had a translucent quality that suggested something other than flesh underneath. "Michael," it said in Jake's voice and smiled with teeth that were far too sharp. "I was hoping you'd join us." Its free hand, Jake's hand but with fingers that bent the wrong way, reached for my throat. I threw myself backward, grabbing Sarah's arm and pulling her away from those claws. We ran together, leaving our flashlights behind, stumbling through the darkness guided only by instinct and terror. We found Becca huddled at the base of a massive oak tree, her arms wrapped around her knees and her whole body shaking. When our footsteps approached, she looked up with wild eyes. "It's not just Jake," she whispered. "There are more of them. I saw them in the trees. Things that look like people but aren't. They're everywhere." As if summoned by her words, we began to hear voices calling from the darkness around us. Familiar voices. Our families, our friends, our co-workers. All pleading for help, all sounding perfectly real and desperately afraid. "Becca, honey, where are you?" That was her mother's voice coming from somewhere to our left. "Sarah, I need you." Her younger brother's voice, high with panic, from the opposite direction. "Michael, son, I'm lost." My father's voice, tinged with the confusion that had marked his final days before dementia claimed him completely. But my father had been dead for 3 years. "Don't listen," I told the others, though my voice was shaking. "Whatever they are, they're not real. They're using our memories against us." "How?" Sarah sobbed. "How do they know these voices?" I thought about the thing wearing Jake's face, how it had known our deepest secrets and fears. They have Jake. They have access to everything he knew about us. Everyone he ever met through us. The voices grew closer, more desperate. Soon, we could hear footsteps approaching from every direction, the sound of our loved ones searching for us in the darkness. The logical part of my mind knew it was impossible, that our families were hundreds of miles away, safe in their own homes. But the emotional impact was devastating. "We have to move," I said. "Find somewhere defensible and wait for dawn." But where could we go? The forest around us seemed infinite, and every direction looked the same. Worse, I was beginning to suspect that geography here didn't follow normal rules. We'd been running for hours, but hadn't encountered any of the landmarks we should have found. The main park roads, the visitor center, even the parking area where we'd left our car. "There," Becca pointed to a rocky outcropping about 50 yards away. "If we can get our backs to the stone, they can't surround us." It was a good plan, maybe our only option. We made our way carefully through the trees, trying to stay quiet despite our desperate need for speed. The voices continued to call from the darkness, but they seemed to be holding back, as if waiting for something. We reached the rocky outcropping just as the moon emerged from behind the clouds, bathing the forest in pale, silver light. What we saw in that sudden illumination nearly broke what remained of our sanity. The trees around us were full of figures, dozens of them, standing motionless among the branches like grotesque ornaments. They all looked familiar, distorted versions of people we knew, people we loved. I saw my mother, my sister, my college roommate, all watching us with pale, pupilless eyes, and, standing at the front of the supernatural congregation, smiling that horrible, too-wide smile, was Jake. "You can't run forever," he said conversationally. "This forest is ours now, and so are you. The hunger needs to be fed, and you're going to help us feed it." "What hunger?" I demanded, though part of me didn't want to know the answer. Jake's smile grew impossibly wider. "The hunger that came with the winter that never ended. The hunger that made us what we are. The hunger that makes us need to hunt, to take, to become more than we were." I'd heard stories like this before, whispered around campfires by older hikers and park rangers, Native American legends about creatures that were once human but had been transformed by starvation and desperation into something else, something that could never stop hunting, never stop feeding. Wendigo. "You're all dead," Sarah whispered, understanding flooding her voice. "You're all supposed to be dead." "Dead, alive, such limited concepts," the Jake thing replied. "We're beyond such simple distinctions now. And soon, you will be too." The figures in the trees began to move, climbing down with inhuman grace and agility. As they came closer, I could see the full extent of their transformation. They were all stretched and distorted, with elongated limbs and fingers that had become claws. Their skin had a translucent quality that revealed the dark network of veins beneath, and their eyes. Their eyes were holes filled with starlight and endless hunger. "Run," I breathed. We pressed our backs against the stone outcropping and tried to find a way up, but the rock face was too steep, too smooth. The creatures were advancing slowly, savoring our terror, confident that we had nowhere left to go. It was Becca who noticed the crack in the rock face, a narrow fissure maybe 3 feet wide and just tall enough for a person to squeeze through. Without hesitation, she pushed inside, and Sarah and I followed, scraping our shoulders against the rough stone. The passage was claustrophobic and completely dark, but it was better than facing those things outside. We crawled forward on our hands and knees, feeling our way through the narrow space. Behind us, we could hear claws scraping against stone as the creatures tried to follow. The passage opened into a small cave, maybe 10 feet square, with a ceiling just high enough to stand upright. It was a natural shelter, carved from the limestone by centuries of water flow, and most importantly, it had only one entrance, the crack we'd just crawled through. "We can defend this," I said, more hope than confidence in my voice. We gathered loose rocks and positioned ourselves near the entrance, ready to fight off anything that tried to squeeze through. Outside, we could hear the creatures moving around, testing the rock face, looking for other ways in. "They can't get through," Sarah said. "Not in those forms. They're too big now." But even as she spoke, we heard a sound that made our blood freeze, bones cracking and restructuring, flesh tearing and reforming. The creatures were changing, adapting, making themselves small enough to fit through the crack. The first one that squeezed through was barely recognizable as having once been human. It moved like a spider, all elongated limbs and wrong angles. Its head turned to face us while its body pointed in the opposite direction. The face was familiar, my college roommate Tom, but the expression was pure, alien hunger. I brought a rock down on its head with all my strength. The impact made a wet, crushing sound and dark fluid splattered across the cave floor. The creature collapsed and lay still, but even as I watched, the wounds began to close. "They heal," Becca said in a voice empty of hope. "We can't kill them." More creatures were squeezing through the crack now, faster than we could fight them off. In minutes, we would be overwhelmed. That's when Sarah did something that probably saved all our lives, though at a cost I'm still not sure it was worth paying. She pulled out her emergency flare. Every experienced hiker carries one, and lit it, filling the cave with brilliant red light. The creatures recoiled as if they'd been burned, scrambling backward toward the entrance. But instead of leaving, Sarah held the flare higher and stepped toward them. "Iron oxide," she said grimly. "I remember reading about it in folklore classes. Some supernatural creatures are vulnerable to iron." She advanced on the creatures, who pressed themselves against the walls to avoid the flare's light. It was working. They were afraid of it. But flares don't last forever, and we had only 2 more. "We need to get out of here while we can," I said. "Back to the main trail, back to civilization." "Which direction?" Becca asked. "We don't even know where we are anymore." Sarah held the flare toward the cave entrance. "Down. These caves are carved by water flow, so they must lead toward the main creek system. If we follow the water, we'll eventually reach the park roads." It was a plan, maybe our only chance. Sarah led the way with the flare held high, while Becca and I followed with rocks ready to throw at anything that got too close. The creatures shadowed us but didn't attack, staying just beyond the flare's red glow. The cave system was more extensive than we'd realized, branching off in multiple directions, all sloping generally downward. We chose passages based on airflow and the sound of moving water, following our noses toward the surface. It took hours. We used all 3 flares making our way through the underground maze, and by the time we saw actual daylight filtering down from above, the last flare was guttering out. The creatures had grown bolder as the light faded, pressing closer, reaching out with those impossible claws. We emerged from a narrow cave mouth into blinding sunlight, stumbling out onto a slope covered with normal, healthy forest. Behind us, the creatures' howls of frustration echoed from the cave depths, but they didn't follow us into the light. "The road," Becca pointed with a shaking hand. "I can see the road." It was maybe half a mile away through the trees, an actual paved road with the yellow center line that meant civilization and safety. We ran toward it, crashing through the underbrush, not caring about the noise we made. The park ranger who found us later said we were lucky to be alive. He'd been leading a search party since we'd failed to check in at the visitor center as scheduled. According to him, we'd been missing for 5 days. Though it felt like we'd been in those woods for weeks, they never found Jake. The official report listed him as lost in the wilderness, probably fallen into one of the deep crevices that honeycombed the limestone ridge. They searched for 3 days with dogs and helicopters but found no trace. Sarah, Becca, and I were questioned extensively, but we'd agreed on our story. Jake had wandered off during the night and never returned. We mentioned nothing about the creatures, the impossible geography, or what we'd really seen. Who would have believed us? But I know he's still out there, somewhere in those woods that exist alongside but separate from the normal world. Still hunting, still hungry, wearing the face of my friend but serving something far older and more terrible. The 3 of us don't talk anymore. We can't. Every time we see each other, we're reminded of that night, of the sounds Jake made as something else learned to use his voice. Sarah moved across the country, and Becca checks herself into psychiatric facilities every few months, convinced she's losing her mind. Maybe she is. Maybe we all are. But sometimes, late at night when I'm alone in my apartment, I hear Jake's voice calling to me from outside my window. Always friendly, always concerned, asking why I won't come outside and play like we used to. I never look. I've learned that some invitations are better left unanswered. The hunger in those woods is still there, still waiting. And it remembers us. It will always remember us. My name is Michael Williams, and I am 34 years old. This happened in the Yellow River State Forest in northeast Iowa, deep in the backwoods near the Minnesota border, where the trees grow thick and the cell towers don't reach. Jake Morrison and I had been planning this hunting trip for months. We'd both needed to get away from the suffocating routine of our office jobs in Cedar Rapids, and Jake had found what he claimed was the perfect spot, a remote section of Yellow River State Forest where his grandfather used to hunt decades ago. "Untouched wilderness," he'd said, spreading out a faded topographical map on my kitchen table. "No other hunters for miles. We'll have the whole forest to ourselves." I should have paid more attention to the way his finger trembled slightly as he traced the route, or how his voice caught when he mentioned his grandfather. But I was too eager to escape the fluorescent prison of my cubicle, too hungry for the promise of crisp autumn air and the satisfying weight of my rifle in my hands. We set out on a Friday morning in late October, Jake's beaten-up Ford pickup loaded with enough supplies for a week. The plan was simple. Drive as far into the forest as the old logging roads would take us, then hike another 5 miles to Jake's grandfather's old campsite near Chimney Rock Bluff. 3 days of hunting, 3 nights under the stars, and then back to civilization. The drive took longer than expected. The main roads gave way to gravel, then to dirt tracks barely wide enough for the truck. Branches scraped against the windows with fingernail-on-chalkboard shrieks that made my teeth ache. Jake grew quieter the deeper we went, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "You sure you remember the way?" I asked as we bounced through another pothole that felt deep enough to swallow the truck. Jake nodded, but his eyes kept darting to the tree line. "Grandfather brought me here when I was 12. Some things you don't forget." The way he said it made something cold settle in my stomach, but I pushed the feeling aside. Jake had always been the dramatic type. We reached the end of the road just after noon. The truck sat at the edge of a clearing that felt too perfect, too circular, like something had carved it out of the forest with surgical precision. Ancient oaks and maples pressed in from all sides, their branches interlocked overhead in a canopy so thick that even in daylight, shadows pooled in the spaces between the trees. Loading our packs took longer than it should have. Jake kept stopping to stare at the forest, his head tilted like he was listening to something I couldn't hear. When I asked what was wrong, he just shook his head and mumbled about how different everything looked. The hike in was brutal. The old trail Jake remembered was overgrown almost to the point of disappearing, choked with brambles that seemed to grab at our clothes with deliberate malice. My GPS lost signal within the first mile, the screen showing nothing but a blank gray void where our location should have been. Jake's compass spun lazily, never settling on any particular direction. "Magnetic interference," Jake said when I pointed it out, but his voice lacked conviction. "Iron deposits in the rock." The trees grew stranger as we hiked deeper. Some were twisted into impossible spirals, their bark scarred with marks that looked almost like writing. Others stood dead and leafless despite the season, their branches reaching toward the sky like gnarled fingers. The air tasted of metal and decay, and no matter how deeply I breathed, I couldn't seem to get enough oxygen. We found the campsite just as the sun was setting. Chimney Rock Bluff rose above us like a broken tooth, its limestone face pocked with caves that exhaled cold, stale air. The clearing where Jake's grandfather had once camped was smaller than I'd expected, barely large enough for our 2 tents. A ring of blackened stones marked where countless fires had burned, and something about the arrangement made my skin crawl. The stones weren't just scorched, they were melted, fused together in twisted shapes that hurt to look at directly. "This is it," Jake said, but he didn't sound happy about it. He stood at the edge of the clearing, his pack still on his shoulders, staring at the fire ring like it might bite him. "Your grandfather had good taste," I said, trying to lighten the mood. "Great hunting spot." Jake flinched. "Yeah, he was a hell of a hunter." We set up camp in silence as darkness fell with unnatural speed. One moment we were working in twilight, the next we were fumbling with tent stakes by flashlight. The forest around us had gone completely quiet. No owls, no rustling leaves, not even the buzz of insects. Just silence so complete it seemed to press against my eardrums. I tried to start a fire while Jake finished with his tent. The wood was dry, the kindling perfect, but the flames kept dying no matter what I did. Each time I got a small blaze going, it would flicker and fade, leaving behind coals that glowed an unsettling shade of blue-green. "Having trouble?" Jake appeared beside me, his face pale in the flashlight beam. "Wood must be treated with something," I muttered, striking another match. This time the fire caught and held, but the flames danced wrong, seeming to bend toward the forest instead of reaching for the sky. We ate dinner from cans, neither of us speaking much. The silence of the forest was infectious, making even normal conversation feel like shouting in a library. Jake kept glancing over his shoulder at the darkness beyond our small circle of firelight, and I found myself doing the same. There was something about the way the shadows moved that didn't seem quite natural, as if they were flowing like water instead of shifting with the flames. "Tell me about your grandfather," I said, desperate to break the tension. "What was he like?" Jake's hand tightened around his beer can, denting the aluminum. "He was complicated. Came back from Korea different, you know? Mom said the war changed him." "Different how?" "He'd disappear for weeks at a time. Come out here to hunt," he said. "But he never brought back any deer, any game at all. Just stories. Stories about things in the forest that didn't belong there." The fire popped, sending sparks spiraling up toward the branches, and I jumped. "What kind of things?" Jake was quiet for so long I thought he wasn't going to answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. He said there were things that looked like people but weren't, things that were always hungry, always cold. He shuddered. "He died out here, you know. Heart attack, they said, but they never found his body." "Jesus, Jake, why didn't you tell me this earlier?" "Because you wouldn't have come." He looked at me across the fire, and in the dancing light his eyes seemed to have too much white showing. "And I needed to come back, to see." "See what?" But Jake had already turned away, staring out at the darkness. "I'm going to bed. We'll start hunting at first light." I wanted to press him for answers, but something in his posture warned me off. Instead, I banked the fire and crawled into my tent, listening to the nylon walls pop and shift in the cold air. My sleeping bag felt like ice despite being rated for temperatures far below freezing, and no matter how I positioned myself, I couldn't get warm. Sleep came in fits and starts. I kept waking to sounds that weren't quite sounds. Footsteps that stopped the moment I focused on them. Voices speaking words I couldn't quite make out. Once I heard Jake talking to someone outside his tent, but when I called his name, the conversation stopped abruptly. "Just a dream," he said when I asked about it in the morning, but his eyes wouldn't meet mine. The first day of hunting was a disaster. We hiked for hours through terrain that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at it. Paths that had been clear on the way in were now blocked by fallen trees, while new trails appeared where none had existed before. My compass still spun uselessly, and Jake's GPS showed us moving in impossible directions, sometimes backward, sometimes in perfect circles. We saw no deer, no tracks, no sign that any animal had passed through these woods in years. The only things we found were more of those twisted trees and strange marks carved into rocks and bark. Up close, the marks definitely looked like some kind of writing, but in no alphabet I recognized. The symbols seemed to writhe and shift when I stared at them too long, making my head pound. "My grandfather's work," Jake said when I pointed out a particularly elaborate carving. He said they were warnings. Warnings about what? Jake just shook his head and kept walking. By afternoon, we were both exhausted and on edge. The forest felt like a maze designed by someone with a twisted sense of humor, leading us in circles and dead ends. Worse, I was starting to feel like we were being watched. Not by animals. This was something else, something that stayed just out of sight but never quite left us alone. We made it back to camp just as the sun was setting, both of us empty-handed and frustrated. Jake immediately began gathering wood for the fire, his movements sharp and agitated. "I'm going to scout ahead for tomorrow," I said, shouldering my day pack. "Maybe check out those caves in the bluff." "No." Jake's voice was sharp enough to cut. "Don't go near the caves." "Why not?" "Just trust me. We'll try the east side tomorrow, away from the bluff." I wanted to argue, but the look in Jake's eyes stopped me. Instead, I settled down beside the fire and tried to make sense of our position on the map. According to the topographical survey, we should have been able to see the Iowa River from here, but all I could see was more forest stretching endlessly in every direction. The fire was acting strange again, the flames bending toward the trees no matter which way the wind was blowing. I was feeding it another log when Jake suddenly went rigid beside me. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. I listened, straining my ears against the silence. At first there was nothing, but then I caught it. A sound like someone walking through the underbrush circling our camp just beyond the reach of the firelight. The footsteps were wrong, though. Too slow, with too much time between each step, as if whatever was making them was dragging its feet. "Probably just a deer," I said, but my hand was already moving toward my rifle. The footsteps stopped. For a moment, the forest was silent again. Then someone called Jake's name from the darkness. It was Jake's voice. I looked at Jake sitting beside me, his face pale in the firelight, his lips pressed together in a tight line. The voice called again, still using Jake's vocal patterns, his inflections, but coming from somewhere in the trees to our left. "Jake, where are you, buddy? I found something you need to see." Jake's hand shot out and grabbed my wrist. "Don't answer," he hissed. "Don't move." The voice moved around our camp, always staying just out of sight. Sometimes it was Jake's voice calling my name. Sometimes it was my own voice calling for Jake. The words were always just slightly wrong, though. Too formal, or using phrases neither of us would ever say. "Jake Morrison, come to me. I have something that belonged to your grandfather." "Michael Williams, step into the forest. I have answers to your questions." The voices continued for what felt like hours, circling our camp like predators waiting for us to make a mistake. Jake sat frozen beside the fire, his eyes wide with terror, his hand still gripping my wrist hard enough to leave bruises. Finally, as abruptly as they had started, the voices stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse, pregnant with menace and the promise of things unseen. "What the hell was that?" I whispered. Jake's grip on my wrist tightened. "It knows we're here now. We have to leave. First light, we pack up and get out." "Jake, what's going on? What aren't you telling me?" He turned to look at me, and in the firelight I could see tears streaming down his face. "My grandfather didn't die of a heart attack. He killed himself. Left a note saying he couldn't live with what he'd done, couldn't stand being hungry all the time." Jake's voice broke. "He ate someone, Michael. Out here in these woods. He ate someone and it changed him." The words hit me like a physical blow. Jesus Christ. Jake! He wrote about it in his journal, about how the hunger never stopped after that first time, how he could hear something calling to him from the caves, how he wasn't really him anymore. Jake wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "I thought it was just the war, you know, PTSD or something, but then I started having the dreams. Dreams. About this place, about being hungry, about meat." His voice dropped to a whisper. "About you." I lurched backward, my hand going to my rifle, but Jake held up his hands. "I'm fighting it," he said quickly. "I've been fighting it for months. That's why I brought you here. I thought if I faced it, if I came back to where it started, maybe I could break whatever hold it has on me. You're scaring the shit out of me, Jake. I'm scaring myself." He looked back toward the caves and the bluff, and I saw his jaw muscles working. But it's getting stronger. The hunger. Sometimes I look at people and all I can think about is how they might taste. I was on my feet now, rifle in hand, not quite pointing it at Jake, but ready to. "We're leaving, right now." "In the dark, through those woods." Jake laughed, but there was no humor in it. "We'll be lost in 10 minutes. And besides," he gestured toward the forest around us, "I don't think it's going to let us leave." As if to prove his point, the voices started up again. This time they were coming from all directions, dozens of them, all using our voices but saying things we'd never said. "Jake, why don't you come hunting with me anymore?" "Michael, remember that time we shared that deer we found? The meat was so sweet, so fresh. I'm so hungry, Jake, so very hungry." The voices were closer now, and through the trees I could see movement. Shapes that might have been human, but wrong, somehow. Too tall, or moving in ways that human joints weren't designed for. They stayed just at the edge of the firelight, never quite stepping into the open, but I could feel their eyes on us. Jake stood up slowly, his hands shaking. "I can hear it calling," he said, "from the caves. It wants me to come home." "Jake, don't." But he was already walking toward the edge of the clearing, his movements stiff and puppet-like. I followed, keeping my rifle ready as he approached the base of the bluff. The largest cave yawned open about 20 feet up the rock face, accessible by a narrow ledge that looked like it had been carved by hand. "Grandfather," Jake called softly, "I'm here. I came back like you wanted." Something moved in the cave mouth. For a moment I thought it was just shadows, but then I realized the shadows were moving wrong, flowing downward like thick liquid. A figure stepped onto the ledge, tall, impossibly thin, wearing what looked like the rotted remains of hunting clothes. Its face was wrong, all sharp angles and too many teeth. But the eyes were Jake's grandfather's. I knew because they were the same eyes Jake had shown me in old family photos, the same pale blue, the same stubborn set to the brows. But they were hungry now, so hungry it hurt to look at them. "Jacob," the thing said, and its voice was like wind through dry leaves. "You've grown so much, and you brought me a gift." It was looking at me. Jake took another step forward, his foot on the first stone of the path leading up to the cave. "I brought him for you, grandfather, just like you asked in the dreams." The betrayal hit me like a sledgehammer. "Jake, no." "I'm sorry," Jake said, but he didn't turn around. "I'm so hungry, Michael, and it says if I feed it, the hunger will stop." I raised my rifle, not sure if I was aiming at Jake or the thing on the ledge. "Step away from there, Jake, right now." The creature on the ledge laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "He can't. The hunger has him now, just like it had me, just like it will have you." More shapes were emerging from other caves, climbing down the rock face with spider-like grace. They all wore the faces of people I almost recognized, features that were familiar but stretched and twisted, as if someone had tried to recreate human faces from a half-remembered description. Jake was halfway up the path now, moving like a sleepwalker. I had to stop him, but I couldn't bring myself to shoot my oldest friend. Instead, I fired a warning shot into the air. The sound echoed off the bluff like thunder, and for a moment, everything went still. Then Jake screamed. It wasn't a human scream. It was the sound an animal makes when it's caught in a trap, all pain and rage and desperation. Jake spun around to face me, and his eyes were no longer entirely his own. They held that same terrible hunger I'd seen in his grandfather's face. "You ruined it," he snarled, his voice distorting as he spoke. "I was going to make it quick for you, painless. But now..." He launched himself down the path, moving faster than any human should be able to move. I squeezed the trigger, aiming for his legs, trying to stop him without killing him. The bullet caught him in the thigh and spun him around, but he kept coming. Crawling now, his fingers elongated into claws that scratched against the stone. The things from the caves were descending too, surrounding the clearing, cutting off any escape. I fired again, this time at the creature wearing his grandfather's face. The bullet passed right through it without effect, and it laughed that horrible glass-breaking laugh. "Iron and lead won't help you here," it said. "This is our place, our hunting ground." Jake reached the bottom of the path and lunged at me. I dodged aside and smashed the rifle butt into his skull, feeling the bone crack under the impact. He went down hard, blood pooling under his head, but his eyes stayed open, still burning with that terrible hunger. "Run," he whispered, his voice his own again for just a moment. "They can't leave the forest. Get to the truck and run." I didn't need to be told twice. I bolted for the tree line, crashing through the underbrush as the creatures behind me let out howls of frustration. Branches tore at my clothes and skin. Roots tried to trip me, but I kept running, using my flashlight to navigate the maze of twisted trees. Behind me I could hear them following. Not just the creatures from the caves, but Jake too, dragging himself along the ground, calling my name in voices that weren't quite his own. The forest seemed to shift around me as I ran, paths appearing and disappearing, familiar landmarks rearranging themselves into new configurations. My GPS was still dead, my compass still spinning, but I had one advantage the creatures didn't expect. I'd been a Boy Scout, and I knew how to navigate by the stars. The thick canopy made it nearly impossible, but here and there I caught glimpses of the North Star through gaps in the leaves. I ran for what felt like hours, stumbling through the darkness, following a course that should have led me back to the truck. The sounds of pursuit faded gradually, replaced by that oppressive silence that seemed to be the forest's natural state. By the time I found the logging road, I was exhausted, bloody, and shaking uncontrollably. The truck was where we'd left it, untouched and beautiful in the pale moonlight. I fumbled for the keys Jake had given me, started the engine, and drove like hell toward civilization. I made it as far as the main road before I had to stop and vomit. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving me weak and sick with the knowledge of what had happened. Jake was dead, or worse than dead, and his grandfather's journal was probably still back at that campsite, along with whatever other evidence might explain what I'd witnessed. I thought about calling the police, but what would I tell them? That my friend had been possessed by some kind of forest demon and tried to feed me to his cannibalistic grandfather? They'd lock me up or put me in therapy. So I drove home in silence, watching the rearview mirror for any sign of pursuit that never came. When I reached Cedar Rapids, I parked outside my apartment and sat in the truck for a long time, trying to convince myself it had all been some kind of stress-induced hallucination. But I knew better. The scratches on my arms were real. The bullet holes in my rifle were real. And when I checked the weather report, I learned that Jake Morrison had been reported missing 3 days ago when he failed to show up for work. I told the police I didn't know where he'd gone. Told them we'd canceled our hunting trip at the last minute due to bad weather. They seemed to believe me, or at least they had no reason not to. That was 6 months ago. I've tried to forget, tried to convince myself it was all some kind of breakdown brought on by stress and isolation. But sometimes, late at night, I dream about that clearing in the Yellow River forest. I dream about Jake's voice calling my name from the darkness, and I dream about how hungry I've been feeling lately. Last week, I found myself researching the old logging roads that lead into that part of the forest. I've been thinking about how easy it would be to convince someone to come camping with me, someone who trusts me, someone who wouldn't suspect anything until it was too late. The hunger is growing stronger every day, and I think I'm starting to understand why Jake brought me there in the first place. The police found Jake's body yesterday, or what was left of it. The official report says he was killed by a bear, but I know better. They found him in one of the caves below Chimney Rock Bluff, his bones picked clean, his skull cracked open like an egg. They also found his grandfather's journal, buried with him. The police gave it to Jake's mother, but she called me this morning. Said I was Jake's best friend, that he would have wanted me to have it. I'm holding it now as I write this. The leather cover is stained with things I don't want to identify, and the pages are yellow with age. Most of the entries are normal hunting notes, weather observations, descriptions of wildlife. But the last dozen pages describe the hunger and detail that makes my mouth water. I should burn this journal. I should drive as far from Iowa as my car will take me and never look back. But I can't stop reading. Can't stop thinking about the way Jake's grandfather described the taste of human flesh, the satisfaction of feeding that terrible need. I'm so hungry, and I think I know exactly where I need to go to make it stop. My name is Michael Williams and I am 34 years old. This happened in the remote woodlands near Harpers Ferry, Iowa, in the winter of 2024. The four of us worked together at Midwest Agricultural Solutions in Cedar Rapids. Jessica Davis from accounting, Brandon Edwards from logistics, Amanda Wright from marketing, and myself from IT. We'd been talking about taking a weekend camping trip for months, something to break the monotony of spreadsheets and conference calls. When Jessica suggested the driftless area near the Mississippi, with its rugged terrain and ancient forests, it seemed like the perfect escape. It'll be like those survival shows, Brandon had joked, flexing his barely there biceps, except with better snacks and actual tents. Amanda rolled her eyes. Please tell me you're not planning to hunt our dinner with a pointy stick. I brought trail mix and energy bars, Jessica said, ever the practical one, and a really good camp stove. None of us were experienced outdoors people, but we'd all done our research, bought the gear, watched the YouTube videos. How hard could it be? We picked a remote area in the Yellow River State Forest, far from the main trails and campgrounds. The kind of place where you could go hours without seeing another human being. We should have paid attention to that last part. The drive up on Friday afternoon was uneventful. October in Iowa can be beautiful, and this was one of those perfect autumn days when the leaves blazed red and gold against a crystalline blue sky. We parked at the end of a dirt road that had seen better decades, grabbed our packs, and hiked about 3 miles into the forest to find the perfect spot. Perfect turned out to be a small clearing beside Timber Creek, surrounded by towering oaks and maples that formed a natural windbreak. The creek burbled pleasantly over smooth stones, and there was enough flat ground for our tents. By the time we had camp set up, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. "This is actually pretty amazing," Amanda said, standing by the creek and breathing in the crisp air. No emails, no deadlines, no traffic, just quiet. But it wasn't quiet, not really. The forest was full of sounds: rustling leaves, creaking branches, the distant call of an owl. Normal sounds, the kind you'd expect. Except there was something underneath it all, a quality to the silence between sounds that felt heavy, expectant. "Anyone else feel like we're being watched?" Brandon asked, poking at our campfire with a stick. "It's just the trees," Jessica said, but her voice was tighter than usual. "Dense forest always feels like that." I nodded, though I'd felt it too, that prickle between your shoulder blades, the sense of eyes in the darkness beyond our circle of firelight. Probably just deer or something. We're in their territory now. We cooked dinner over the fire. Nothing fancy, just foil packets with chicken and vegetables, and the conversation flowed easily enough. Work gossip, weekend plans, Amanda's ongoing saga with her nightmare landlord. Normal stuff. But as the night deepened, we found ourselves speaking more quietly, as if afraid to disturb something in the surrounding darkness. "Did anyone else's phone completely die?" Brandon asked around 9 o'clock. "I had 3/4 battery when we got here. Now it won't even turn on." We all checked. Mine was dead too, though it had been fully charged that morning. So were Jessica's and Amanda's. "Weird," Amanda muttered. "Maybe it's the cold." "It's only 50 degrees, I said. "That shouldn't affect them." "Electronics are finicky," Jessica offered, but she didn't sound convinced. We banked the fire and retreated to our tents around 10. I shared a 2-person tent with Brandon, while Jessica and Amanda had their own. As I lay in my sleeping bag listening to Brandon's soft snoring, I found myself straining to hear the sounds outside. The creek still babbled, the trees still creaked, but there was something else now. A rhythmic sound, almost like footsteps, circling our camp just beyond the range of vision. I unzipped the tent flap and peered out. The fire had burned down to glowing coals, casting shifting red shadows across the clearing. The moon was nearly full, turning everything silver and black. I could see Jessica and Amanda's tent, the dark line of the creek, the wall of trees beyond. Nothing moved, nothing seemed out of place, but the footsteps continued, slow and deliberate, keeping just outside the edge of hearing. When I focused on them directly, they seemed to stop. When I relaxed, they resumed. I lay awake for another hour before exhaustion finally dragged me under. Saturday dawned gray and cold, with a thin mist rising from the creek. I felt groggy and disoriented, like I hadn't slept at all. The others looked the same. Dark circles under their eyes, movements sluggish and uncertain. "Anyone else have weird dreams?" Amanda asked, nursing a cup of coffee by the rebuilt fire. "I kept hearing things," Brandon said, "like something walking around outside." "I heard that too," I admitted. "Thought it might be a deer." Jessica shook her head. "Deer don't walk like that. Too steady, too purposeful." We spent the morning exploring the area, following game trails deeper into the forest. The mist never quite lifted, giving everything a dreamlike quality. Colors seemed muted, sounds dampened. More than once I had the sensation that we'd passed the same fallen log or distinctive rock formation, even though we were following what appeared to be a straight path. "Are we going in circles?" Amanda asked after about an hour. I checked my compass, an actual magnetic compass, since our phones were still dead. "We should be heading northwest," I said, frowning at the needle. "But this says we're going southeast." "Let me see that." Jessica took the compass, shook it, held it level. The needle spun wildly before settling on a completely different direction. "That's not right." "Maybe there's iron in the soil," Brandon suggested, "or some kind of magnetic interference." But when we tried to retrace our steps back to camp, following our own footprints in the soft earth, the trails seemed to branch and split in ways that made no sense. After 2 hours of wandering, increasingly frustrated and worried, we stumbled back into our clearing purely by accident. "This is getting weird," Amanda said, slumping onto a fallen log. "Really weird." "At least we found camp," I said, trying to inject some optimism into my voice. "Let's just stick close to base for the rest of the day." We spent the afternoon playing cards and talking, but the conversation felt forced, artificial. The mist hung around the edges of the clearing like smoke, never quite dissipating even when the sun broke through the clouds. And always there was that sense of being observed, of something patient and hungry watching from the tree line. As evening approached, we began gathering firewood for the night. The forest floor was littered with dry branches and fallen timber, so it should have been easy work, but every piece of wood we collected seemed to crumble in our hands, turning to punk and sawdust the moment we touched it. Only the freshest branches, still green and sappy, would hold together long enough to make it back to camp. "This is insane," Brandon muttered, staring at a branch that had literally dissolved in his grip. "Wood doesn't just rot like that." "Maybe it's a fungus," Jessica said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Some kind of accelerated decomposition. By sunset, we had enough green wood for a small fire, but it burned poorly, producing more smoke than heat or light. The flames flickered and danced in unnatural colors, sickly yellows and greens that hurt to look at directly. "I don't like this," Amanda said, moving her camping chair closer to mine. "I really don't like this." None of us did, but what choice did we have? We were 3 miles from the car in the middle of a forest that seemed increasingly hostile to our presence. The smart thing would have been to pack up and hike out by moonlight, but the idea of navigating those twisted trails in the dark felt even more dangerous than staying put. "We'll leave first thing in the morning," I decided. "Pack up at dawn and get out of here." The others nodded gratefully. We ate a quick dinner of granola bars and instant soup, then huddled around our miserable fire as darkness closed in around us. That's when we heard the screaming. It came from deep in the forest, maybe half a mile away. A human voice, unmistakably, raised in agony and terror. The sound rose and fell, echoing off the trees before cutting off abruptly. We sat frozen, listening to the sudden silence. "What the hell was that?" Brandon whispered. "Sounded like someone in trouble," Jessica said, already standing up. "We should—" "No." The word came out sharper than I'd intended. "No, we shouldn't. Whatever's happening out there, we can't help. We need to stay together and stay here." "But if someone's hurt, then they're beyond our help," I said firmly. "We don't have working phones. We don't know these woods, and we sure as hell don't know what made that person scream. The best thing we can do is wait for morning and get out of here." Amanda nodded emphatically. "Michael's right. That didn't sound like an accident. That sounded like—" She didn't finish the sentence, but we all knew what she meant. That had been the sound of someone dying badly. We tried to keep the conversation going, but the screaming had shattered what little piece we'd managed to build. Every snapping twig, every rustle in the underbrush made us jump. The fire continued to burn wrong, casting dancing shadows that seemed to move independently of the flames. Around midnight, Jessica stood up abruptly. "I need more firewood," she announced. This is barely enough to last another hour. I'll come with you, I said, but she waved me off. It's fine. I'll just grab some of those fallen branches by the creek. Be back in 5 minutes. Before any of us could protest, she grabbed her flashlight and disappeared into the darkness beyond our fire's glow. 5 minutes stretched to 10, then 15. Jessica, Amanda called. Jess, where are you? No answer. She probably got turned around, Brandon said, but his voice was tight with worry. These woods are confusing even in daylight. Jessica, I shouted, cupping my hands around my mouth. Follow the sound of my voice. Nothing. We have to go look for her, Amanda said, grabbing her own flashlight. Together, I insisted. Nobody goes anywhere alone. We followed the creek bank, calling Jessica's name and sweeping our flashlight beams through the trees. The water burbled innocently beside us, but the forest felt malevolent, pressing in from all sides. Our lights seemed dimmer than they should be, the beams swallowed by the darkness after only a few yards. There, Brandon said, pointing to something glinting near the water's edge. Jessica's flashlight lying abandoned on the rocky shore. The lens was cracked, and when I picked it up, the metal housing was ice cold despite the mild night air. Jessica, Amanda screamed, her voice cracking with panic. Jessica! Look, I said, training my light on the ground near where we'd found the flashlight. Tracks. The soft earth showed clear footprints leading away from the creek and deeper into the forest. Jessica's hiking boots with their distinctive waffle sole pattern. But as we followed the trail, the prints became wrong. Longer, wider, the heel marks deeper, as if Jessica had suddenly gained 100 pounds. What the fuck? Brandon breathed, kneeling beside one of the later prints. This doesn't make sense. The tracks ended at a massive oak tree, its trunk easily 4 feet in diameter. We played our lights over the bark, looking for any sign of where Jessica might have gone. Nothing. The tracks simply stopped, as if she'd vanished into thin air. People don't just disappear, Amanda said, but her voice was shaking. No, I agreed. They don't. We spent another hour searching, calling Jessica's name until our throats were raw. But the forest gave us nothing back except our own echoes and the growing certainty that something terrible had happened to our friend. Finally, cold and exhausted, we returned to camp. The fire had burned down to almost nothing in our absence, and the darkness seemed to press against us like a living thing. We have to leave, Amanda said. Right now. We pack up and hike out. I don't care how dark it is. And abandon Jessica? Brandon asked. Jessica's gone, I said quietly. Whatever happened to her, we can't help her now, but we can keep ourselves alive. We were packing our gear by flashlight when she came back. I heard her first, footsteps on the other side of camp, slow and deliberate. Too deliberate, like someone concentrating very hard on the simple act of walking. Jessica, I called, relief flooding through me. She stepped into the circle of our flashlight beams and my relief died instantly. It was Jessica, unmistakably. Same clothes, same red hair, same freckled face. But something was fundamentally wrong. She stood too still, too straight, like a person trying very hard to remember how humans were supposed to hold themselves. Her eyes reflected our lights like an animal's, twin points of silver in the darkness. "Hi," she said, and her voice was perfectly normal. Too normal, like an actor delivering a line she'd rehearsed. "Sorry I was gone so long. I got lost." "Where were you?" Amanda asked, taking a step toward her. "We looked everywhere. We found your flashlight by the creek." Jessica tilted her head, considering the question with an odd mechanical precision. "I dropped it," she said finally. "I was gathering wood and I dropped it." "Where's the wood?" Brandon asked. Another pause, longer this time. "I couldn't find any good pieces." "Jessica," I said carefully, "are you okay? You seem different." She smiled then, and my blood turned to ice. It was Jessica's smile, technically speaking. Same lips, same teeth, but it lasted too long. stretching on until it became a rictus of exposed enamel and gums. "I'm fine," she said through that terrible smile. "I'm better than fine. I'm hungry." The way she said that last word, hungry, made my skin crawl. Not the casual hunger of someone wanting a snack, but something deeper, primal, ravenous. "When's the last time you ate?" Amanda asked, apparently not picking up on the wrongness that was setting every nerve in my body on fire. "A long time," Jessica said, and now she was looking directly at Amanda with those silver-reflecting eyes. "Such a long time." "I've got granola bars," Amanda offered, reaching for her pack. "Amanda, no," I said sharply, grabbing her wrist. "Something's wrong." "Michael's right," Brandon whispered. "Jess, you're scaring us. What happened out there?" Jessica's smile faltered, just for a moment, and something else flickered across her features. Something ancient and alien and utterly inhuman. "Nothing happened," she said. "I got lost, and now I'm back, and I'm so very hungry." That's when I noticed her hands. Jessica had bitten her nails down to the quick for as long as I'd known her, a nervous habit she'd never been able to break. But the thing wearing her face had long, yellowed claws extending from its fingertips. "Run," I whispered to Brandon and Amanda. "Run now." The Jessica thing's head snapped toward me with predatory speed. "Don't run," it said, and now its voice was layered with harmonics that belonged to no human throat. "Stay. Feed me." Amanda gasped, finally seeing what I'd seen, and stumbled backward. The motion triggered something in the creature, some hunting instinct that had been held in check by its crude mimicry of humanity. It lunged. What followed was a nightmare of speed and violence and sounds that will haunt me for the rest of my life. The thing that had been Jessica moved like a wild animal, all coiled muscle and snapping teeth. Its face elongated as I watched, jaw unhinging to reveal rows of needle-sharp fangs. Its limbs stretched and bent in ways that human joints weren't meant to accommodate. Brandon screamed and swung his flashlight like a club, the heavy maglite connecting with the creature's skull with a sound like breaking wood. It staggered but didn't fall, turning toward him with a hiss that raised every hair on my body. "The car!" I shouted, grabbing Amanda's hand and pulling her toward the tree line. "Get to the car!" We ran blindly through the forest, crashing through underbrush and stumbling over roots. Behind us, I could hear Brandon's voice raised in terror, then cutting off abruptly. Something roared in the darkness, a sound like wind through a canyon, but with an underlying note of hunger that spoke to every prey instinct hardwired into my brain. "This way," Amanda gasped, pulling me toward what looked like a game trail. But the forest that had confused us during the day was actively malevolent in the darkness. Paths branched and twisted back on themselves. Trees that should have been landmarks rearranged themselves when we weren't looking directly at them. More than once, we found ourselves back at our abandoned campsite, the fire now completely dead, our scattered gear testament to how quickly everything had gone wrong. "We're going in circles," Amanda panted. "No," I said, checking my compass again. The needle spun wildly before pointing straight up, defying both gravity and magnetism. "We're being herded." The creature was hunting us, driving us like deer toward some predetermined killing ground. I could hear it moving through the trees around us, always just outside the range of our failing flashlights. Sometimes it would make sounds, Jessica's voice calling our names, or Brandon's voice begging for help. But there were subtle wrongnesses in the intonation, like a parrot mimicking human speech without understanding the meaning. "Amanda," it called in Jessica's voice. "Michael, I'm hurt. Please help me." "Don't listen," I whispered. "It's not her." "I know," Amanda whispered back, but I could see the tears on her cheeks. We kept moving, though exhaustion was making us clumsy. My lungs burned from the cold air and constant exertion. My legs felt like rubber. But the alternative was to stop and let that thing catch us, and after what I'd seen happen to Brandon. "There," Amanda said, pointing through the trees. "I see light." She was right. A faint glow filtered through the bare branches ahead of us, steady and white. Electric light, not the flickering orange of a campfire. Could be a house, I said hopefully, someone with a phone. We pushed through the underbrush toward the light, hope giving us new energy. But as we drew closer, my optimism curdled into fresh horror. It was a house, all right. A small cabin that looked like it had been abandoned for decades. The walls were gray with age and neglect, the roof sagging under the weight of fallen branches. But the windows blazed with electric light, impossible after so many years without maintenance. Should we? Amanda started. Do we have a choice? The front door stood slightly ajar, yellow light spilling out onto the overgrown front yard. As we approached, I could smell something cooking, meat roasting over an open fire. My stomach, empty for hours, growled traitorously. "Hello?" I called. "Is anyone there? We need help." No answer, but the door swung open wider, as if in invitation. The interior of the cabin was a study in contradictions. The furniture was ancient and rotting, the floorboards warped and stained, but electric bulbs burned brightly in ceiling fixtures that should have been dark for decades. A fire crackled merrily in a stone fireplace, and something definitely sizzled in a cast-iron pot hanging over the flames. "This is wrong," Amanda whispered. "This is all wrong." I nodded, but we were past the point of good choices. Outside, I could hear the creature moving through the trees, getting closer. Whatever was waiting for us in this impossible cabin, it had to be better than the thing wearing Jessica's face. We stepped inside. The warmth hit us immediately, so intense after hours in the cold forest that it was almost overwhelming. The smell of cooking meat made my mouth water despite everything that had happened. I found myself moving toward the fireplace, drawn by the promise of heat and food. "Don't," Amanda said, grabbing my arm. "Look at the walls." I forced myself to focus and my stomach lurched. The walls were covered with photographs, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. All showed groups of people in outdoor settings, camping, hiking, fishing, happy faces around campfires, posed shots with heavy backpacks and hiking gear. But every single photograph had been defaced. The faces had been carefully cut out, leaving empty holes where eyes and mouths should be. Some of the photos were recent, printed on glossy digital paper. Others were old Polaroids, faded with age. "How long has this been happening?" Amanda breathed. Before I could answer, something moved in the shadows near the back of the cabin. A figure stepped into the light, and I bit back a scream. It was human, technically speaking, an old woman, bent with age, wearing a tattered dress that might once have been blue. But her eyes were the same silver-reflecting orbs I'd seen in the Jessica thing, and when she smiled, her teeth were filed to points. "Visitors," she said in a voice like grinding stone. "It's been so long since we've had visitors." "We're just lost," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We're looking for the way back to our car." "Oh, you won't be needing your car," the old woman said, shuffling closer. "You'll be staying with us, forever and ever and ever." That's when I noticed the pot over the fire. What I'd taken for stew wasn't stew at all. Pale chunks of meat bobbed in the bubbling liquid, along with what looked suspiciously like a human hand, wedding ring still glinting on one finger. "Amanda," I said quietly, "when I say run, head for the back of the cabin. There has to be another way out." The old woman cocked her head, listening to something I couldn't hear. Then she smiled that awful pointed smile. "He's coming," she said. "My grandson. He's bringing the fresh one." Through the open front door, I could see the creature that had been Jessica dragging something through the underbrush. Something that moved feebly and moaned in Brandon's voice. "Run," I said. We bolted toward the back of the cabin, knocking over furniture in our desperate haste. The old woman screeched behind us, a sound like steam escaping from a kettle. There was a back door, thank God, and it wasn't locked. We burst out into the night and kept running. Behind us, the cabin erupted in activity. Inhuman voices raised in anger, the sound of pursuit crashing through the forest. But something had changed. The oppressive wrongness that had clung to the forest all weekend was lifting, replaced by something that felt almost like hope. My compass needle swung to magnetic north and stayed there. The trees no longer seemed to shift and rearrange themselves when we weren't looking. "The road," Amanda gasped, pointing ahead. "I can see the road." She was right. The dirt track where we'd left my Jeep gleamed pale in the moonlight, maybe 50 yards ahead. I fumbled for my keys as we ran, praying that whatever had killed our phones hadn't affected the car's electrical system. The Jeep started on the first try, headlights cutting through the darkness like knives. I threw it in reverse and gunned the engine, tires spinning on the loose gravel. In the rearview mirror, I caught a glimpse of shapes moving at the forest's edge. Tall, impossibly thin figures with silver eyes and too many teeth. Then we were on the main road, speeding toward civilization and safety and explanations that would never come. We drove straight to the sheriff's office in Prairie du Chien, babbling our story to a deputy who looked like he'd heard it all before. Search teams went out the next morning, found our abandoned campsite, Jessica's broken flashlight by the creek. But no trace of Jessica herself, or Brandon, or the cabin that couldn't exist. "Happens sometimes," the deputy told us with weary resignation. "People go into those old woods and just disappear. Been happening for generations. Native tribes used to avoid that whole area, called it cursed." "What was out there?" I asked. He shrugged. "Depends who you ask. Some say it's the ghost of an old trapper who went cannibal during a hard winter. Others think it's something that was here before the first humans ever crossed the land bridge from Asia. Something that's always been hungry." Amanda and I gave our statements, filled out the paperwork, endured the skeptical looks. Then we drove back to Cedar Rapids in silence, both of us lost in our own thoughts. I quit my job the next week. Couldn't stand being in that office, seeing Jessica's empty desk, remembering her laugh. Amanda transferred to the company's Denver branch and we lost touch after that. I heard she moved back east somewhere, closer to family. I never went camping again. I haven't set foot in a forest since that weekend. People think I'm paranoid, antisocial. Maybe I am, but sometimes, on particularly dark nights, I still hear Jessica's voice calling my name from somewhere far away. Calling and calling, with that terrible artificial cheer, promising that she's found such wonderful things to eat. And sometimes when I'm walking alone at night, I see silver eyes watching me from dark windows and empty doorways. Patient, hungry, waiting for me to stray too far from the lights and the crowds and the safety of civilization. They're still out there, in the deep woods where maps don't work and compasses spin wild. The old woman and her grandson and all the others they've collected over the years. Jessica is probably one of them now, if anything of her survived the transformation. Brandon, too. I should have saved them. Should have done something, been braver, been smarter. But I was just a guy from IT who thought camping would be fun, and I learned too late that some hungers are older than humanity itself. The Wendigo. That's what the deputy called it later when the alcohol had loosened his tongue. An Algonquian legend about cannibals who ate human flesh until they became something else, something always starving, never satisfied. He said the early French traders brought stories back from the wilderness, tales of men who'd been transformed by their appetites into creatures of endless hunger. "Course, that's just superstition," he'd added, but his eyes said otherwise. I know better now. I know that some legends are warnings, and some warnings aren't metaphors. I know that there are places in this world where the old rules still apply, where hunger is a force of nature and humans are just another item on the menu. And I know that Jessica and Brandon are still out there somewhere, waiting in the dark between the trees, smiling their too wide smiles and calling to anyone foolish enough to venture into their domain. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if we'd just stayed home that weekend. If we'd gone to a movie instead, or out to dinner, or done any of the 1,000 other things people do when they want to escape their ordinary lives for a while. But then I remember those silver eyes and those filed teeth, and I realize it probably wouldn't have mattered. Some things are patient, some things can wait forever, and some hungers never sleep. My name is Samuel Morris and I am 23 years old. This happened in the remote wilderness near Effigy Mounds National Monument in northeastern Iowa, in a place locals call Devil's Backbone Ridge. The idea for our camping trip came from Jake, as most of our bad ideas did. We'd just finished our junior year at the University of Iowa, and he insisted we needed to celebrate with something more adventurous than the usual house parties in Iowa City. Real wilderness, he'd said, spreading a topographical map across his dorm room floor. None of that state park bullshit with bathrooms and trail markers. I should have known better. Jake Brennan had always been the type to push boundaries, to find the edge of things and lean over just to see what would happen. But after 3 years of lecture halls and textbooks, the promise of genuine solitude felt like exactly what I needed. Our group consisted of 4 of us: Jake, myself, my roommate Marcus Chen, a quiet engineering student who could build a shelter from nothing but twigs and determination, and Sarah Kellerman, Jake's on-and-off girlfriend who somehow always ended up coming along on these adventures despite their volatile relationship. Sarah had grown up on a farm outside Cedar Rapids and knew more about outdoor survival than the rest of us combined. We set out on a Friday morning in late October, when the leaves had turned but hadn't yet fallen, creating a canopy of amber and rust that filtered the sunlight into something almost magical. The plan was simple: 3 days of hiking and camping in the undeveloped areas north of the monument, where the forest grew thick and the tourist trails didn't reach. The first sign something was wrong came when we reached our intended camping spot along Yellow River. According to Jake's GPS, we were exactly where we should be, but the landscape didn't match our topographical map. The river bent east instead of northwest, and there was a deep hollow filled with gnarled oak trees that shouldn't have existed. "Technology glitch," Marcus said, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses as he studied his own GPS unit. "Sometimes the satellite coverage gets weird in these river valleys." Sarah frowned at the map, her finger tracing the contour lines. "This doesn't feel right. I've hiked this area before with my dad. That hollow shouldn't be there." But Jake was already unloading his pack, clearly eager to set up camp. "Come on, guys. So what if we're a little off course? This spot's perfect. Look at that flat area by the water." I wanted to agree with Sarah's caution, but the exhaustion from our 6-hour hike was settling into my bones. The flat area Jake had indicated was sheltered from the wind and close enough to the water for easy access. More importantly, the trees formed a natural barrier that would provide privacy and protection. "Let's just stay here tonight," I said, setting down my pack with a grateful sigh. "We can figure out our location in the morning." We made camp as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. Marcus and I gathered firewood while Jake and Sarah set up the tents. By the time full darkness fell, we had a comfortable fire crackling and were sharing a dinner of trail mix and instant noodles that tasted better than any restaurant meal after a day of hiking. That's when I first noticed the silence. In most wilderness areas, evening brings a symphony of sounds: insects chirping, small animals rustling through undergrowth, the distant call of owls or coyotes. But as we sat around our fire, the only sounds were our own voices and the soft snap and hiss of burning wood. Even the river seemed muted, though it flowed just 30 feet away. "It's too quiet," Sarah said, voicing what I'd been thinking. She pulled her jacket tighter around her shoulders. "Where are all the night sounds?" Jake laughed, but it came out forced. Maybe we scared everything away with our brilliant conversation about Marcus's love life. "Fuck off," Marcus replied good-naturedly, but I could see he was listening too, his head tilted like a dog trying to identify a distant sound. The fire began to behave strangely around 10 o'clock. Despite the windless night, the flames kept shifting direction, sometimes burning blue at the base instead of the normal yellow-orange. When Sarah added more wood, the fire hissed and spat as if the logs were wet, though they'd been bone dry when we gathered them. "Weird," Marcus muttered, poking at the flames with a stick. "Must be something in the wood. Different mineral content in the soil here, maybe." But I was watching the forest beyond our circle of firelight, and I could swear I saw movement among the trees. Not the random sway of branches or the scurrying of small animals, but deliberate, patient movement. Something large shifting position just outside the reach of our vision. "Did you guys hear that?" Sarah whispered suddenly. We all fell silent, straining to listen. At first there was nothing, just that oppressive quiet that seemed to press against our eardrums. Then I heard it. A soft, scratching sound, like fingernails against bark, coming from the direction of the hollow. "Probably just a raccoon," Jake said, but his voice lacked conviction. The scratching continued, moving in a slow circle around our campsite. It would stop for long minutes, then start again from a different direction. Each time it seemed closer. "I'm going to check it out," Jake announced, reaching for his flashlight. "Don't," Sarah said sharply. Let's just stay by the fire tonight." Something in her tone made me look at her more closely. Her face was pale in the firelight, and she kept glancing toward the hollow with an expression I couldn't quite read. Fear, maybe, but something else too. Recognition? "Sarah," I said carefully, "have you been here before? This exact spot?" She was quiet for so long I thought she wasn't going to answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "My dad used to tell stories about this area. Old stories, from when his grandfather was young, about a hollow in the woods where things went missing." She gestured toward the depression filled with oak trees. "He called it the Hunger Hollow." "What kind of things?" Marcus asked. "Hunting parties. Sometimes whole families traveling through. They'd find the camps later, tents still set up, food still warm over the fire, but no people. Never any people." Jake snorted. "Great, ghost stories. Just what we need." But I noticed he didn't reach for his flashlight again. We stayed up later than planned, feeding the fire and talking in low voices about anything except Sarah's story. Eventually, exhaustion won out, and we retreated to our tents. Jake and Sarah sharing the larger two-person tent, Marcus and I each in solo shelters. I lay in my sleeping bag listening to the continued silence outside, broken only by the occasional crackle from our dying fire. Despite my tiredness, sleep felt impossible. Every small sound, the rustle of my sleeping bag, Marcus shifting in his tent nearby, even my own breathing, seemed amplified in the unnatural quiet. Sometime after midnight I heard Jake's tent zipper opening. "Just going to take a piss," he whispered, presumably to Sarah. I listened to his footsteps moving away from camp toward the tree line. After a few minutes I expected to hear him returning, but there was only silence. 5 minutes passed, then 10. "Jake," Sarah's voice called softly from their tent. "Jake, come back." No response. I unzipped my own tent and stuck my head out. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, casting just enough light to see the outlines of our camp. Sarah emerged from her tent at the same time, her hair wild and her eyes reflecting the ember light like an animal's. "How long has he been gone?" I whispered. "Too long," she replied, reaching for her flashlight. Marcus joined us, pulling on his jacket over his thermal shirt. "Should we go look for him?" The three of us stood there for a moment, forming an unconscious triangle around the dying fire. The darkness beyond our small circle of light felt thick and watchful, as if it were a living thing waiting for us to step outside our protective boundary. "Jake!" Sarah called, louder this time. "This isn't funny." Her voice seemed to be swallowed by the trees, creating no echo despite the hollow's natural acoustics. The silence that followed felt heavier than before, pressing down on us like a physical weight. "We should search together," I said. "Stay close. Keep the lights on." We spent the next hour combing through the trees around our campsite, calling Jake's name and sweeping our flashlight beams across the forest floor. We found no trace of him, no footprints, no broken branches, nothing to indicate which direction he'd gone. "This is impossible," Marcus said, his voice tight with frustration. "People don't just vanish. There has to be some sign." But there wasn't. It was as if Jake had simply stepped into the darkness and ceased to exist. We returned to camp as the eastern sky began to show the first pale hints of dawn. Sarah sat on a log by the fire pit, methodically feeding twigs to the embers to keep them alive. Her movements were mechanical, repetitive, like a ritual or a prayer. "We should hike out," Marcus said. "Get help, search and rescue teams, maybe the Park Service." "No," Sarah said without looking up. "He'll come back." There was something in her tone that made me uneasy, a certainty that seemed out of place given the circumstances. "Sarah, we've searched everywhere. If he was just lost nearby, we would have found him." She finally looked at me, and I saw something strange in her eyes, a kind of knowing that hadn't been there before. "He'll come back," she repeated. "They always come back." The sun was fully up by the time we heard movement in the trees, a slow, deliberate rustling that came from the direction of the hollow. We all stood up, our heads turned toward the sound like compass needles pointing north. Jake emerged from between the oak trees, walking with slow, measured steps. At first glance, he looked normal. Same clothes, same general build, same sandy hair. But something was fundamentally wrong. He moved too smoothly, his gait lacking the small imperfections that make human movement natural. His arms swung in perfect rhythm and his head remained unnaturally still, as if his neck were made of wood. "Jake!" Marcus called out, relief evident in his voice. He started toward him, but I grabbed his arm. "Wait," I said, though I couldn't articulate why. Jake approached our campsite with that strange, mechanical walk. When he reached the edge of our fire circle, he stopped and stood motionless for several seconds. Then his mouth stretched into a smile that was too wide and held too long. "Good morning," he said. His voice sounded right, but the words came out flat, without inflection. "Jesus, Jake, where the hell were you?" Marcus demanded. "We've been looking for you all night." Jake's head turned toward Marcus with sharp, precise movement, like a security camera tracking motion. "I was exploring," he said in that same flat tone. "I found interesting things." "What kind of things?" I asked. The smile widened impossibly. "Old things, hungry things." Sarah stood up from her position by the fire. "Jake, are you feeling okay? You look pale." For the first time since his return, Jake's expression changed. His head tilted to one side, studying Sarah with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "I feel very good," he said. "Better than I have ever felt." His eyes, I realized, weren't blinking. At all. "When did you last blink?" I asked suddenly. The question seemed to confuse him. His head tilted further like a bird trying to understand a strange sound. "Blink?" he repeated. That's when I noticed his breathing. Or rather, the lack of it. His chest wasn't moving up and down. He was standing perfectly still, like a mannequin. "Marcus," I said quietly, "back away slowly." But Marcus wasn't listening. He was studying Jake with scientific curiosity, the way he might examine a malfunctioning machine. "This is fascinating," he murmured. "Some kind of shock response, maybe? Trauma-induced dissociation?" Jake's head snapped toward Marcus with an audible crack, rotating too far, at an angle that should have been impossible for a human neck. "I'm not shocked," he said, his voice gaining volume and depth. "I am not traumatized. I am fed." The last word came out as a growl. That's when Sarah screamed. Not a scream of fear or surprise, but of recognition, of terrible understanding. "It's not Jake," she gasped. "It's not him anymore." The thing wearing Jake's face turned toward her, and its too wide smile stretched even further, revealing teeth that seemed sharper than they should be. "Clever girl," it said in a voice that was no longer Jake's at all, but something deeper and older. "You know the stories." "Run," Sarah whispered, then louder. "Run!" We scattered in different directions. I heard Marcus crashing through the underbrush to my left, and Sarah's footsteps heading toward the river. I ran straight into the forest, branches whipping at my face and roots trying to catch my feet. Behind me, something was pursuing. Not running, exactly, but moving through the trees with impossible speed and grace. I could hear it keeping pace with me, sometimes ahead, sometimes behind, playing with me like a cat with a mouse. I stumbled into a small clearing and risked a look back. The thing that had been Jake was standing at the edge of the trees, watching me with those unblinking eyes. In the morning sunlight, I could see that his skin had taken on a grayish pallor, and his fingernails had grown into black claws. "Samuel," it called, using Jake's voice again, "don't run from your friend." "You're not Jake," I panted. It laughed, a sound like wind through dead leaves. "I am more Jake than Jake ever was. I have his memories, his thoughts, his knowledge of you. I know that you failed calculus twice. I know that you've been in love with Sarah since freshman year, but never told her because of your loyalty to Jake. I know about the night terrors you've had since childhood, the ones where something chases you through endless darkness." The accuracy of these statements hit me like physical blows. How could it know things that even my closest friends didn't know? "I know because I consumed him," it continued, "flesh and bone and memory. He is part of me now, just as you will be." It stepped into the clearing, moving with that same unnatural smoothness. Up close, I could see that Jake's clothes were torn and stained with something dark. His shoes were gone, and his feet were wrong, too long, with too many joints. "What are you?" I whispered. "I am hunger," it replied. "I am winter that never ends. I am the space between heartbeats where fear lives. Your people have names for me, but they are all just sounds. I am older than your words." A Wendigo. The realization hit me with crystalline clarity. The creature from Sarah's grandfather's stories, from Algonquian legends, from whispered tales around campfires. A cannibalistic monster born from human desperation and starvation, forever hungry, forever hunting. "But the stories say you live in the far north," I said, backing away slowly, "in the deep wilderness of Canada and Minnesota." It tilted its head, Jake's head, with that bird-like motion. "Stories change. Truth adapts. I go where the hunger calls me, and there is much hunger in these times, much loneliness, much fear." Something crashed through the trees behind me. I spun around to see Marcus stumbling into the clearing, his glasses missing and a long scratch down his left cheek. "Sam," he gasped. "It's Sarah. Something's wrong with Sarah." The Wendigo made a sound that might have been laughter. "Oh yes, she fed me such interesting memories. A farm girl who learned to slaughter animals when she was 7 years old. Who helped her father bury the cattle that died of disease in the back pasture. Who always wondered what human flesh might taste like." My blood turned to ice water in my veins. "You didn't?" "I offered her a choice," it said. "Become the hunter or remain the prey. She chose wisely." Marcus was looking back and forth between me and the creature, confusion and terror warring on his face. "Sam, what the fuck is going on? Where's Jake? And why are you talking to him like he's—" "It's not Jake," I said urgently. "It's something else, something that killed Jake and took his shape." Marcus stared at the Wendigo, and I watched understanding slowly dawn on his face. His engineering mind, trained to analyze and problem-solve, was processing the evidence. The unnatural stillness, the wrong movement patterns, the torn clothes and missing shoes. "That's impossible," he whispered. "Impossible," the Wendigo agreed in Jake's voice. "Like a machine that learns to think. Like signals traveling through air to create voices and images. Like metal birds that carry humans across oceans. Your species creates impossibilities every day, Marcus Chen. You simply lack imagination." The use of Marcus's full name, spoken in that flat, alien tone, was what finally broke him. He turned and ran blindly back into the trees, crashing through undergrowth with all the subtlety of a wounded bear. "Should I pursue him?" The Wendigo asked the question as if we were planning a hiking route. "Why are you asking me?" "Because you interest me, Samuel Morris. You have not run again. You have not begged or wept or offered bargains. You stand and speak with me as if I were merely another predator instead of your ending. This is unusual. The truth was that terror had moved beyond normal fear into a kind of crystalline calm. I was going to die here, in this clearing, probably in the next few minutes, but somehow knowing that with certainty had freed me from the paralysis of uncertainty. Maybe I'm just tired of running, I said, or maybe you understand what I am, which means you understand what I need. You need to feed. Yes, but more than that. It stepped closer, close enough that I could smell the wrongness radiating from Jake's stolen skin, a scent like meat left too long in a warm car. I need to become. Your friend Jake was hungry, but his hunger was simple. Food, pleasure, validation, small hungers that led to small actions. It was standing directly in front of me now, its face inches from mine. Jake's familiar features were subtly wrong, as if someone had tried to recreate them from memory rather than direct observation. I have been awakened by greater hungers, it continued. The hunger that drives humans to destroy their own habitat for temporary comfort. The hunger that makes them manufacture substances to make themselves forget their own thoughts. The hunger that leads them to sit alone in small rooms, feeding on electronic stimulation while their bodies decay. You're talking about addiction, I realized, depression, environmental destruction. I am talking about spiritual starvation. Your species has created abundance beyond the dreams of any previous generation, yet you hunger more desperately than any creature I have encountered. You have separated yourselves from the natural cycles of feast and famine, predator and prey, life and death. In doing so, you have become prey to hungers you do not even recognize. The philosophical discussion was surreal, but I found myself genuinely curious despite the circumstances. So you're what? Some kind of cosmic correction? A natural consequence? I am adaptation, it said. I am evolution in response to new pressures. I am the hunger that feeds on hunger itself. A scream echoed through the forest, high and sharp and definitely human. Marcus. The Wendigo's head turned toward the sound with that mechanical precision. Your friend has encountered my companion. Sarah. The shell that was Sarah, yes. She adapted more quickly than I expected. The capacity was already there, dormant, but present. She required only the proper encouragement. Another scream, this one cut short. Is he dead? Eventually. She is learning to prolong the experience, to savor it. The farm girl who always wondered about the taste of human flesh is discovering that reality exceeds imagination. I felt my carefully maintained calm beginning to crack. Marcus was my roommate, my study partner, one of the few genuine friends I'd made in college. The idea of him being tortured to death by something wearing Sarah's face was almost more than I could process. You seem distressed, the Wendigo observed. This is interesting. You accepted your own death with equanimity, but the suffering of your companion disturbs you. He's my friend. Yes, and friends matter to you more than your own survival. This is why I chose you to preserve. The words didn't make sense at first. Preserve. Your species is fascinating, but flawed. Too many individuals focused on temporary, selfish gratifications. Not enough who understand the value of sacrifice, of loyalty, of genuine connection. You will help me understand how to cultivate these qualities in my chosen. Your chosen. The ones I do not consume immediately. The ones I reshape into something useful, something that can help me spread and adapt and grow. It smiled with Jake's mouth. You will be my first disciple, Samuel Morris. Together, we will teach your species about true hunger. The idea hit me like a physical blow. It wasn't planning to kill me. It was planning to change me, to make me into something like what it had done to Sarah, a human shell animated by alien hunger, helping it hunt and feed and spread. No, I whispered. Yes, it replied with absolute certainty. You will resist at first. They always do. But hunger is patient, and hunger is persistent. Eventually, you will understand that joining me is the only alternative to joining your dead friends. That's when the plan formed in my mind. Desperate, probably suicidal, but better than the alternative. Before you do whatever you're going to do, I said, I want to understand something. It tilted its head in that bird-like way. Yes? The Hollow. Why here? What makes this place special? Places of power, it said. Thin spots where the barriers between hungers become permeable. Your indigenous peoples understood this. They built their sacred mounds nearby as warnings, as protections. But memory fades, and protections weaken. So you've been here before. I have slept here for decades at a time, waiting for the proper conditions, the proper prey. What woke you up this time? It considered the question with apparent seriousness. Your friend Jake. His hunger was so focused, so pure. 3 days ago, when your group was planning this excursion, he sat in his dormitory room and imagined scenarios. Imagined Sarah alone with him in the wilderness. Imagined overcoming her resistance to his advances. Imagined taking what he wanted regardless of her consent. My stomach lurched. I'd known Jake could be pushy with women, but I'd never imagined. His fantasies called to me, the Wendigo continued. Such clean, uncomplicated hunger. Such willingness to consume another person for his own gratification. He was already halfway to becoming what I needed him to be. You killed him for that? I consumed him for that. There is a difference. His body died, but his essence, his hunger, became part of me. He is more fulfilled now than he ever was in life. And Sarah? Sarah was more complex. Her hunger was buried deeper, disguised as moral behavior and social conditioning. But it was there. The farmer's daughter who helped slaughter animals, who felt a secret thrill watching the light fade from their eyes, who wondered what it would feel like to have that kind of power over something that could think and speak and beg. I backed away slowly, keeping my eyes on the creature's face. So you awakened her buried desires. I offered her truth, the acknowledgement that every human is capable of becoming a predator, given the proper circumstances, that the difference between civilized and savage is simply opportunity. I was at the edge of the clearing now, feeling tree branches against my back. And what about Marcus? Marcus was the most honest of your group. His hunger was simple, the desire to understand, to analyze, to solve problems. Unfortunately, some problems cannot be solved through intellectual analysis. Some problems can only be survived through instinct and violence. Another scream echoed through the forest, weaker this time. He is learning this lesson now, the Wendigo added. I pretended to stumble backward, putting my hand against a tree trunk for support. What I was actually doing was feeling for the right kind of branch, something long enough, heavy enough, dry enough to burn quickly. You seem to know a lot about human psychology, I said, keeping it talking while my fingers searched. I have consumed many humans over the centuries. Each one teaches me something new about your species. Your fears, your desires, your weaknesses. Jake taught me about entitlement. Sarah taught me about buried violence. Marcus is teaching me about the limits of rationality. My hand closed around a branch that felt right, about 3 feet long, thick as my wrist, with bark that would catch fire easily. What will you learn from me? I asked. That remains to be seen, but I suspect you will teach me about loyalty, about the lengths to which humans will go to protect those they care about. That's when I broke the branch off the tree and swung it as hard as I could at the Wendigo's head. The blow connected with a sound like an axe hitting wet wood. The creature staggered but didn't fall. Instead, it turned toward me with what might have been amusement. Interesting, it said. Jake's face was already healing, the indentation from my strike smoothing out like putty. But ultimately futile. I was already running, crashing through the undergrowth toward our campsite. Behind me, I could hear the Wendigo pursuing. moving through the trees with that impossible fluid grace. I reached our fire pit to find the embers still glowing red. Our gear was scattered where we'd left it in our panic, including the small container of camp fuel Marcus had brought for his portable stove. I grabbed the fuel and doused the broken branch, then thrust it into the embers. It caught immediately, flames running up the wood like liquid fire. The Wendigo emerged from the tree line just as I turned to face it, brandishing my improvised torch. "Fire," it said, and for the first time, I heard something like concern in its voice. "Clever." "Stay back," I warned, though I had no idea if fire would actually hurt it or just slow it down. It stopped at the edge of our campsite, maintaining a careful distance from the flames. "Fire is the old enemy," it said. "The first tool your species learned to use against the darkness. But fire burns out, Samuel Morris, and I am patient. Maybe, but I don't need to burn forever. I just need to burn long enough." I started backing toward the trees, keeping the torch between myself and the creature. My plan, such as it was, involved reaching the river and either finding Marcus and getting the hell out of here, or at least dying somewhere other than this cursed hollow. That's when Sarah appeared. She stepped out from behind our tents, moving with the same unnatural smoothness as the Wendigo. But where Jake's transformation had been subtle, Sarah's was obvious. Her clothes were soaked with blood, not her own, I suspected, and her hands had been replaced by something that looked more like talons. Her face was still recognizably hers, but her expression was utterly alien. "Hello, Sam," she said in her own voice, but with inflections that were wrong. Too precise, too measured. "I missed you." "Sarah," I whispered. "Fight it. I know you're still in there somewhere." She laughed, and the sound made my skin crawl. "Oh, I'm fighting it, Sam. I'm fighting the last vestiges of weakness and social conditioning that kept me from becoming what I was always meant to be. This isn't you. This is more me than I've ever been." She took a step closer, and I could smell the copper scent of blood on her. "Do you want to know what Marcus tasted like? What it felt like to finally stop pretending to be something I'm not?" I swung the torch in her direction, and she danced back out of range with movements that were too quick, too fluid. "The fire won't protect you forever," she said, "and when it burns out, we'll have all the time in the world to explore your boundaries, to find out what it takes to make you surrender your precious morality." The Wendigo spoke from behind me. "She learns quickly. Already she understands that conversion is more valuable than consumption, that spreading the hunger is more important than merely feeding it." I was trapped between them, holding a torch that was already beginning to burn lower. In a few minutes, I'd have nothing but a charred stick. "There has to be a way to fight this," I said. "Your ancestors knew how to protect themselves from creatures like you, the sacred mounds, the warnings. Your ancestors also knew that some hungers cannot be fought," the Wendigo interrupted. "Only redirected." "What do you mean?" "They offered sacrifices. They chose the acceptable losses to protect the whole. They understood that balance requires both feeding and fasting, both predator and prey." Sarah was circling me now, staying just outside the reach of my firelight. "He's offering you a choice, Sam. Join us willingly, and we'll make your transition easy. Keep fighting, and we'll make it last for days." The torch was burning down to my hand now. I could feel the heat against my fingers, smell the scent of singed hair. In another minute or two, I'd have to drop it or burn myself. That's when I heard the helicopter. The sound was distant but definitely mechanical, the distinctive whoop, whoop, whoop of rotor blades cutting through air. A search and rescue team, probably called in when we failed to return as scheduled. Both creatures heard it too. Sarah's head snapped toward the sky, and the Wendigo made a sound like an angry cat. "They're looking for us," I said. "How are you going to explain 4 missing college students?" "We will not need to explain anything," the Wendigo replied. "They will find your campsite abandoned, your gear scattered as if you fled in panic. They will assume you became lost in the wilderness. Such things happen often enough. But they'll keep looking. For a while. Then they will assume you died of exposure or accident. Your bodies will never be found because your bodies will be part of us. The helicopter was getting closer. I could see lights now, sweeping back and forth through the trees as the search team tried to spot our campsite from above. Unless, the Wendigo continued, we give them something to find. It moved toward me with sudden speed, but I was ready. I thrust the torch directly at its face, and it recoiled with a hiss that sounded more animal than human. "Burn," I whispered, and then I hurled the torch directly into the hollow. The flame arced through the air and landed among the dry oak leaves that had accumulated at the bottom of the depression. They caught immediately, fire spreading outward in a circle that grew larger by the second. The Wendigo screamed, actually screamed, as the flames began to climb the oak trees. Sarah joined her voice to its, the two of them making a sound like wind through a graveyard. "The hollow," Sarah gasped. "You're burning the hollow." "Good," I said, grabbing a burning branch from the spreading fire. "Maybe it'll burn you with it." I started toward them with my new torch, and they retreated, backing away from the growing conflagration. The fire was spreading faster than should have been possible, as if the trees themselves were eager to burn. The helicopter was directly overhead now, its searchlight sweeping across our campsite. I could see the pilot banking toward the fire, radioing for ground support and water drops. "This isn't over," the Wendigo said, its voice barely audible over the roar of flames and rotor blades. "You have only delayed the inevitable." "Maybe," I replied, "but delay is all I need." They melted back into the forest as the first emergency response vehicles began arriving. I stood in our abandoned campsite, holding my burning branch and watching the hollow burn, until the firefighters reached me and led me to safety. I told them that my friends had become separated from me during the night, that I'd lost track of them in the darkness and started the signal fire when I heard the helicopter. They found no trace of Jake, Sarah, or Marcus, despite extensive searching. The official report listed them as missing, presumed dead due to exposure or accident. I never told anyone what really happened in that hollow. Who would believe me? And more importantly, what good would it do? The creatures that had taken my friends were gone, driven away by fire and human activity. For now. But I know they're still out there somewhere. The Wendigo was right about one thing. Hunger is patient. And in a world full of isolated, desperate, spiritually starved people, there will always be new opportunities to feed. Sometimes, late at night, I think I hear Jake's voice calling my name from just outside my apartment window. Or I'll see someone who looks like Sarah walking past my classroom building, moving with that familiar, unnatural smoothness. When that happens, I check to make sure my lighter still works, and I remember the sound of flames consuming the hollow where my friends died. The fire department managed to contain the blaze before it spread beyond the immediate area. According to the local news reports, the intense heat was unusual for a wildfire in that region, and the burn pattern was described as anomalous. The hollow itself was completely destroyed, reduced to charred earth and ash. I graduated the following spring and moved back home to Des Moines. I work as an insurance adjuster now, investigating claims and assessing damages. It's mundane work, but I find comfort in the routine, in dealing with problems that have clear solutions and documented procedures. I've never been camping since that October night. I probably never will again. But sometimes, when I'm driving through rural Iowa for work and I see a patch of dark forest or an isolated farmhouse, I remember what the Wendigo said about hunger, about how it adapts and spreads, about how it goes where it's called. And I wonder if 3 days was really enough time to burn it all away, or if some hungers are too deep to ever truly die. The nightmares come less frequently now, but they still come. In them, I'm always back in that clearing, watching Jake's face stretch into that impossible smile. Sometimes Sarah is there too, her hands covered in Marcus's blood, asking me if I want to know what it tastes like. In the worst dreams, I say yes. I wake up from those with my heart hammering and my sheets soaked in sweat, checking my hands to make sure they're still clean, still mine, because I know that somewhere out there, in some other hollow, in some other wilderness, the hunger is still waiting, still patient, still growing, and I know that next time I might not have a torch to light their way. The end.